Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Decoding the Unknown. A absolute beast of an episode. Dennis, who wrote this, I'm embarrassed now. He finished on the 18th of October last year. And I don't know when you're hearing this. I'm recording this in early March. And I'm sorry, Dennis. It took me so long because I'm like, oh God, I've got to dedicate like a week to doing this with like reasonable breaks for my voice. And all of this stuff, and it took me way too long. I'm sorry. It's Kaspar Hauser, the Prince Without a Past, and Dennis has even included a dedication at the beginning. And I'll let him have it because it's such a long piece.
That's what she said.
And it's funny. To Todd Howard, executive producer at Bethesda Game Studios. Without him, this episode would have been completed a month earlier. Thank you, Todd. Bethesda's Game Studio. So I'm assuming Dennis is saying that he's been distracted by a game. I don't know which game. I used to play many more video games, and then I had children, and now I barely play video games at all, which is sad, because I like video games. In the vast tapestry, if you're new here, never read this before, Dennis has written it, I read it, that's the format of the show. Settle in! It's a longin'. In the vast tapestry of inexplicable phenomena, few evoke fundamental unease as unfailingly as the abrupt vanishing of a person wiped from the grand stage of life with the blink of an eye. Our most basic concepts of reality dictate that nothing ever ceases to exist without reason. Yet if such a bizarre violation of nature does occur, the lack of answers may instill us with a chilling dread, potentially hinting at unknown forces that defy our understanding of cause and effect. There is, I'd be like, if this was my other show, Catch a Criminal, I'd be like, nah. Some like unknown serial killer who's actually good at crimes, because there are plenty of them, just took that person and buried them on a beach or something like that, or cut them up and put them in the ocean. Like, that's not crimes. It's not like some thing about physics. It's just they were killed. Or they decided to go and start a new life in, like, Borneo or something. There is, however, one type of mystery even more bewildering than the sudden erasure of an individual. Imagine a person not spontaneously cut from the fabric of the universe, but rather randomly popping into existence without a discernible past, without a known origin, without anything but a name, and two very ominous letters. This very scenario played out in 1828 when a teenage boy suddenly appeared in the streets of Nuremberg, confused, scared, and haunted by memories of never-ending darkness. And no, our enigma goes far beyond simple amnesia. Today's episode of Decoding the Casual Criminalist, or whatever. Yeah. I get the feeling this is going to have some crossover things. Casual Criminalist is another podcast I do, which if you wanted to check out, that'd be very welcome of you. Thank you. It chronicles the strange tale of Kaspar Hauser, a case that has captivated philosophers, psychologists, and reputable historians for almost 200 years. A life that both commenced and concluded in thick veils of ambiguity, a secret, wrapped in a secret, embedded in a royal conspiracy that might very well have altered the political trajectory of the entire European continent. Okay? Just a random teenager who was like locked in a basement in the dark for like his entire life. Okay, but worry not. What might initially strike you as the dumbest nonsense you've ever heard in your entire life is, by my estimates at least, guaranteed to eventually make you go, Really selling this, aren't you, Dennis? This episode you're going to think is dumb, but it might make you think a little bit. There won't be any supernatural implications today, no extraterrestrials, no wacky wormhole physics, but just rather good old-fashioned hands-on research. So, follow me along, in the most literal sense, as I have not compiled this story from the comfort of my armchair, but once again travelled the continent to investigate on location, following every possible step of Kaspar Hauser through both public and not-so-public places. As much as I've delayed this episode for like fear of tackling how long it is, I'm genuinely excited to crack on with this. Let me guide you through the Dan Brown novel that Dan Brown never wrote, a journey that culminates in one, nay, two murder mysteries of the highest order, bridging the realms of facts and folklore, deception and misconception, memories and dreams. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Lived. Our tale begins in the mild summer of 1816, along the tranquil banks of the Rhine. Or maybe it doesn't. The vast river, forming a natural border between France and Germany, quietly carried an inconspicuous object downstream that day, which either held the key to unlocking a horrible crime, or was entirely meaningless. The region, then known as Alsace, lay wounded and weary from a decade marred in Napoleonic cannon fire. The Corsican conqueror's downfall at Waterloo had led to the restoration of the French monarchy a year prior, much to the discontent of the populace, who still had their pitchforks from the last revolution at the ready. On the German side of the Rhine, stability proved equally elusive. Not yet a unified nation, the land was fractured into 39 individual territories that constantly vied for power and supremacy. Amidst these times of famine and chaos, the enigmatic object, a message in a bottle, peacefully meandered down the shallow waves. After a journey that might have taken weeks or hours, the container got tangled in the sedge close to the unassuming village of Kems, where an unnamed fisherman would discover it shortly after. When I was a kid, one of my dreams, I'd go to the beach. I don't know how young I was obviously pretty young. It's because now I see this is the sort of thing that my kid would get excited about. Finding a message in a bottle was like my dream. I'd walk up and down the beach, like when we go on holiday, looking for bottles with the hope that there'd be like a little scroll inside them with a message from some dude who's like on a life raft or on an island, and that we'd rescue him somehow. I think probably because I saw it in a movie, but that was like my dream. While the exact path remains unknown, the cryptic letter somehow found its way to the regional prefect, a French political title akin to a governor. Although he initially dismissed the message as a jest or some other kind of hoax, the prefect still decided to commission a copy for the archives, a copy which has fortunately survived the years since. The text read, "Whoever finds this letter, I'm being held prisoner in a dungeon near Laufenburg by the Rhine. My dungeon lies underground, and the location is known only to the person who has now seized my leaf. I cannot write more, as I am being carefully and cruelly guarded. S. Hans Sprancio." In case you're wondering about the leaf that had allegedly been seized, it is essential to note that the author had originally not used the English language. Yeah, I assume he meant life, right? Surprisingly, he did not write in French and German either. Instead, the handwritten plea for help was penned in Latin, a language deemed archaic even in the early 19th century, only used by clerics, scholars, and a handful of pretentious nobles. Folio, which translates to leaf, was likely a spelling mistake, assuming the word was intended to be solio. The unknown abductor had not snatched his victim's salad, but rather his throne. Now, who was this S. Hans Sprancio, you may ask? The French authorities of 1816 were absolutely clueless, or maybe they only pretended to be. But, for whatever reason, they set the case aside, letting the document rot and moulder in the sprawling labyrinths of the archives beneath the Préfecture de Haute-Rhin. Decades upon decades passed, until by pure chance the document miraculously fell into the hands of someone very familiar with the Kaspar Hauser saga that had transpired in the meantime. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. In a later chapter, we'll circle around to Hans Sprancio, armed with more context and an anagram deciphering algorithm. We are on an adventure today. After the this is like a Dan Brown novel. After the foreboding bottle had been found and carelessly ignored, the trail went cold for a while. 12 years would pass for the second chapter of this tale to emerge from the shadows. It was on Whit Monday, 1828, that a young man was secretly being carried through the German landscapes like contraband, his eyes blindfolded, his destination, the Bavarian town of Nuremberg. In the early morning, he was dumped and abandoned in a lonely alleyway like a mangy dog whose owner had grown tired of caring for him. As the boy cautiously lifted the scarf that had shielded his eyes throughout the journey, he found himself left entirely alone. Confusion washed over him as he grappled with the mystery of his circumstances. Where had he come from? And why was he here? His blank mind offered no answers, as if his consciousness had just awakened from the timeless void. As he regained a semblance of focus, he realized that he was holding two sealed letters in his hands. Their origins or purpose he could not fathom. Intrigued by distant voices, he eventually made his way towards the nearby market square, disoriented and ungainly, with legs wobbling beneath him like those of a newborn foal. His worn-out shoes and tattered clothes were ill-fitted. His face, both innocent and bewildered, was covered in a light sheen of sweat, and his squinting eyes darted around as if he'd never seen the light of day before. The oddity of his appearance and demeanor quickly drew curious glances from the traders preparing their stalls. Whispers began to spread quickly as onlookers tried to decipher this mysterious newcomer, their fingers pointing in his direction. Is this guy been kept in, the dark in some dude's basement since he was born, and now as a teenager is just being released into society? This is mental.
That's crazy.
As the crowd on the Unschlitt marketplace grew and murmurs amplified, a local cobbler named Wilhelm Weichmann, intrigued by the spectacle, decided to intervene. Pushing his way through the gathering throng, he reached the young man and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, asking if he needed help. The stranger looked up, his eyelids flickering as though staring directly into the sun. He presented one of 2 crumpled letters to Weichmann, who carefully unfolded it. To the Knight Commander of the 4th Escadron of the 6th Regiment. The envelope read, a title held by a man named Friedrich von Wessing at the time, who was well known among the Nuremberg townsfolk. Weichmann, his brows furrowing in confusion, tried to engage the boy in conversation, but the stranger's vocabulary proved limited and disjointed. In flawed German, he repeated the phrase, "I want to be a rider like my father was," over and over again, though it appeared as if he did not understand the meaning of his own words, akin to a parrot imitating sounds without any real comprehension. Yeah, because he's been in a basement and he's never been taught language. He's just been told what to say. There's some problem, right? Which is why they used to think deaf people were mentally handicapped, because they were never taught a language and that affects how the brain develops. So this guy's gonna, and I believe there's a point you go past where it's like that can't be fixed. You have to learn a language or your brain's not gonna work properly. And this kid's probably definitely past that time.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
Sensing the growing tension and disarray around him, Weichmann quickly decided to take the boy away from prying eyes. He led him by the hand to his humble workshop located in the western corner of the market. The air inside was filled with the scent of leather and acid, an aroma seemingly foreign to his new companion, who scanned his surroundings in the utmost wonder, yet bearing a grimace of disgust. Weichmann set the young man down on a wooden bench, offering him a cup of water. As the stranger sipped slowly, the cobbler scrutinized both the letters, hoping it might shed light on the mystery. Yet once the potential severity of this incident dawned on him, he instead decided to lead his guest to the local police ward immediately. The cobblestone streets of Nuremberg echoed with the sounds of Weichmann's hurried steps as the boy's slower, unsteady pace trailed behind. Arriving at the town hall, which doubled as a police station, Weichmann handed the letters to a constable, hastily explaining the morning's odd events. The officer's eyes skimmed through the words, occasionally throwing skeptical glances toward the fidgeting foundling in front of him. The first letter, addressed to the Knight Commander von Wessing, lacked a signature. Instead, the author merely identified himself as a poor peasant who was not related to the boy by blood. Instead, the scribe spoke of a fateful day in 1812 when a newborn had been abandoned at his doorstep. He had taken custody of the baby unwillingly, taught him basic reading skills, introduced him to the Christian faith, but never allowed him to step outside the door, not even once. The orphan child had been raised in the confines of a locked room, completely unaware of the world outside and vice versa. No human contact, no windows, and nothing but complete and continuous isolation. Not a single second of his life had the boy witnessed the universe beyond his cell. Now that he had grown into a young man, the writer deemed him old enough to find his own path in life. The boy showed interest in becoming a cavalryman, the letter concluded. Thus, he should be referred to the Knight Commander, who may either recruit or simply hang him. Oh my god, they're not just going to hang him, my dude. What the The second letter was shorter, but no less bizarre. It was an apology of sorts, written by the baby's biological mother, who apparently had left this very parchment alongside her newborn child 16 years prior. Her lines begged the finder to take care of her offspring, a duty she felt unable to fulfill, as the father had died a hero on the battlefield. According to her words, the boy, born the 13th of April 1812, had been christened Kaspar. The constable's confusion grew as he delved deeper into the letter's tales, made all the more perplexing by the stranger's otherworldly behavior. Sure, the ward had seen many drifters and crazy vagabonds come through Nuremberg, but none quite as enigmatic as this one. If those letters reflected the truth, the young man before him had never seen the beauty of a flower in his entire life, which would certainly explain why he was now attempting to lick the inspector's potted plants. Okay. After a short consultation with the commander in charge, the constable escorted Kaspar to a separate room where he had faced hundreds of questions, none of which he could understand, let alone answer. As it would appear, the very concept of spoken language eluded him. Nevertheless, devoid of pity and compassion, the officers still persisted in their tactic of repeating the same inquiries for hours on end, hoping that they might eventually prompt a telltale response. Alas, with every imperious word thrown at him, Kaspar only tensed up a little more, in turn leading the constables to increase the pressure even further. Is this some old school policing? This isn't going to work. He doesn't understand you. He's not pretending. As indicated by his adoptive father, Kaspar did recognize a couple of Christian prayers recited to him, and curiously, the sight of Bavarian coin seemed to stir a diffuse memory, though the details of his exact reactions had not been preserved. Apart from these observations, however, their interrogation strategy proved fruitless, or so they thought. Hours later, as Kaspar's hand was led to put a cross below the protocol, the process of using a quill pen seemed utterly familiar to him. In notably beautiful handwriting, he signed the document, not with an X as instructed, but with a name that would accompany him for the rest of his life, Kaspar Hauser. Unfortunately, those were the only 2 words that he could commit to paper. Later into the evening, with no further progress in deciphering the riddle at hand, frustration began to mount among the Nuremberg officials. Though the police now had a full name to work with, they could not locate any records about a potentially matching Hauser family. Moreover, they felt strong distrust towards Kaspar for a particular reason. The 2 letters, supposedly written more than a decade apart by 2 entirely different individuals, bore suspiciously similar strokes when compared to each other. The ink on both papers glistened, not entirely settled, and their scent was a fresh alum rather than the musty aroma of age. Clearly, they'd been created, not to say forged, side by side, no longer than a few weeks earlier. Without the advent of methods like infrared spectroscopy, those suspicions could not be reliably confirmed in 1828. Nonetheless, instead of treating him as the victim of a cruel crime, the constable simply threw Kaspar into the prison alongside drunks and beggars. What did he do? What's his crime? The past, everybody. It's like,
oh yeah, well, we don't really know. What's she do?
I don't know. Prison.
On what charge?
We don't need charges. This is the past. These events of May 20th are meticulously chronicled by a multitude of historical sources, leaving little room for dispute. Those include verified police reports, written testimonies from Wickman and numerous others, the 2 letters themselves, as well as other documents that we're not going to analyse in detail, such as the police ward's 1830 financial report, which listed all expenses for work in Kaspar's case. Yet going forward, the popular narratives will branch out ever so slightly. Now let's start by clarifying to which jail specifically was Kaspar taken by the police. Now this might seem like a trivial detail, but it will later emerge as crucial. Numerous modern accounts contend that he ended up in the subterranean dungeon beneath the town hall, a narrative often intensified by dramatically evoking the adjacent torture room. Even though this place does actually exist, connecting it to Kaspar is highly inaccurate. Over a decade before his appearance in Nuremberg, the practice of torture had been outlawed and abolished for good, rendering the forlorn chambers obsolete and mostly forgotten. Yeah, but he can still be, like, if you go to see a castle today, you can still see the dungeon. There's just hopefully no one in the dungeon. In the late 19th century, the dungeon had been rediscovered and transformed into a mock medieval sham that bore little resemblance to its historical reality. What visitors get to see today, chains, pillories, cages, and other fun BDSM devices, are entirely modern fabrications, as are the unfounded claims tying Kaspar Hauser to its roster of notable residents. No matter what Robert, the tour guide, will tell you, Kaspar had neither been imprisoned nor tortured down there, and I still want my money back, mate. He went there to do this, and he's like, no. You're like the guy on the tour, he's like, he knows more than the tour guide. You're like, actually, my friend. I was on a tour once, and the tour guide was like, yeah, I don't really feel confident about, like, saying much in today's tour, because this dude's Simon, and he makes videos about all sorts of things, so he might know more about this than me. And it was really embarrassing. Rather than being held underground, Kaspar was actually brought to Nuremberg's highest point, the Luginsland prison tower. Speaking of historical misconceptions, it should be noted that the not at all arbitrary concept of magically neutralizing guilt by making people in a room wait for several years is also a relatively modern phenomena. Prison sentences did not really exist in Europe until the mid-19th century, and it is undoubtedly not the timeless default form of punishment you might consider it to be. For the longest time, the oddly specific and somewhat bizarre idea of institutionalized naughty corners was a very rare exception. Rather, holding cells served exclusively pragmatic purposes, such as pre-trial detention, yet without being part of the actual punishment themselves. Yeah, Dennis, I feel you're like,
Yeah, I mean, prison's stupid.
but the alternative was like, well, they're only in like jail or whatever until they go to court, and then it's like, yeah, corporal punishment or death. It's like, well, prison sounds fine. I'll take prison, thank you. No 50 lashes, no gallows. This was the case with Kaspar Hauser, who had not yet been sentenced to prison or anything like that. The constables just had no better idea where to put him. While the barren walls of Luginsland held Kaspar's physical body captive during the subsequent days, the story of his enigmatic emergence could indeed not be shackled. Though the exact pathway remains unknown, word of the mystifying prisoner quickly leaked to the public and rippled throughout the town like an earthquake, captivating the imagination of peasants and nobles alike. Within a day or two, the strange occurrence had morphed into the focal point of local gossip and speculation. Soon enough, even the highest circles of society were drawn into the conundrum. Chapter 2. A Mayor Mistake. As spring gave way to summer, Kaspar remained a prisoner, neither accused nor cleared of any wrongdoing. He's just showed up. Why are we, wondering what to charge him with? King Maximilian's somewhat progressive constitution of 1818 may have ensured the rule of law in theory, yet when it came to the famous Orphan of Nuremberg, those in charge seemed to have forsaken any such ideals. Kaspar was not even subject to an official investigation anymore, but merely a spectacle, a local tourist attraction, a lonely, defenseless exhibit in a human menagerie. Throughout the warm months of 1828, endless flocks of onlookers were drawn to his cell, yelling at him, banging against the gates, making faces, and feasting on his terrors. Why is this to the public? What's wrong with people in the past? Some came bearing gifts of sweets and trinkets, others with cruel intentions, attempting to startle or frighten him with sudden gestures or loud noises. The famous legal scholar and philosopher Anselm von Feuerbach, a regular visitor himself, described the situation as follows. Anyone who wanted to see him was admitted. In fact, Kaspar enjoyed hardly less popularity than a kangaroo or a tame hyena. Andreas Hiltel, the prison's chief warden, kept meticulous records of everyone's favourite inmate. According to his notes, Kaspar's initial sustenance was but the simplest of fare, clear water and unadorned bread. When presented with a platter of cheese, cuts of meat, or ripe fruit, Hiltel noted the young man's bewildered expression. It was as though he gazed upon fantastic artifacts, unfamiliar and unrecognizable as food. The very idea that they were items to be consumed seems foreign to him, though after he had been demonstrated the process of chewing and swallowing multiple times, Kaspar would gradually broaden his dietary habits. Can you imagine never tasting fruit before?
I don't really know what an orange tastes like. I've never had a real orange before.
Never tasting anything sweet, just having bread. You'd be like, holy apples, damn! Apples taste great! On the 3rd day of July, the town's court physician, Karl Prube, dismissed by many as a local quack, conducted a rather unconventional medical examination on Kaspar. He briefly looked at him from a safe distance. Prube concluded that the patient displayed characteristics of a semi-feral creature, suggesting he might have been raised by the wild animals from the neighbouring forests. In his report, then he'd have been at least familiar with flowers. He wouldn't be in that detective's room licking the plants, would he? In his report, he described Kaspar as an untamed beast, an anthropomorphic dog, a ferocious brute residing within a human form. Though clearly clashing with all the known facts, this rather misinformed narrative only intensified public interest. In the early 19th century, distorted and outrageously racist stories of indigenous people and so-called primitive tribes were very much in vogue in the arts and literature communities. A savage child captured from the primal realm beyond civilization's boundaries posed a temptation just impossible to resist for many. The past was the worst. Yes, in the past there were things such as human zoos, where in Europe there'd be just zoos with people from the colonies or whatever it was in the past. And it's the past. It was horrible. You don't want to be there. Unfortunately, you're not. You're probably in the future. Hello, future.
We've met before, have we not?
Among the intrigued and bewitched was Jacob Binder, the reigning mayor of Nuremberg. The case had stirred something strange within him, igniting a flame of curiosity that refused to be quenched. As the moon waxed and waned over Nuremberg, his visits to the prison tower became frequent, even habitual. He would sit and watch Kaspar, with the keen eye of a self-proclaimed scientist, his golden quill pen dancing on parchment as he captured his muse's every nuance, much like a New World explorer deciphering the wonders of an exotic species. But he was not simply swept up in the tide of narrow-minded sensationalism. Oh no, he fancied himself far too sophisticated for such follies. He gawked at Kaspar with a distinct mission, fueled by an underlying hypothesis he desperately yearned to prove. An idea so outlandish and bizarre that I chose to postpone it a little bit for some cheap narrative tension.
You jackass!
Binder's approach towards Kaspar was, in his own unbiased opinion at least, the very epitome of ethical excellence. He treated Kaspar not like a showpiece, but as an individual deserving of compassion and dignity. What a shocking idea! Yet for all his honourable pretences, the idea of releasing his unlawfully detained circus assets strangely eluded his moral highness. After all, there were pressing experiments to conduct. For instance, he once presented Kaspar with a lit candle, curious to see if an innate caution would prevent him from touching the open flame. However, that was not the case. Kaspar reached for the glowing light only to recoil in pain, a reaction that seemed disproportionately intense, almost as if he was experiencing heat for the very first time. Binder continued his series of tests, challenging Kaspar's memory, assessing his sense of smell, examining his physical reflexes, with a rather unsettling emphasis on tickling. Okay. What are you up to, Mayor? You're like, I am a scientist and I shall study this man. Coochie coochie coo!
Stop it. Get some help.
Over time, whilst respectfully tormenting Kaspar in the name of science or whatever, Binder's perception changed, but in a way unsurprising to him. Hidden within the orphan's silent gaze, he discerned an unusual sensitivity, pure and strangely powerful, as if the mysteries of his thoughts went way deeper than the letters had implied. Despite actively upholding the dire circumstances, Binder's visits were paved with benevolent gestures. Those experiments might have had ethics committees spontaneously bursting into flames. He never laid a hand on Kaspar, nor did he apply any pressure in their direct interaction. Well, he obviously laid hands on them. Did we just say that he enjoyed tickling him? Which is bizarre.
He's so relaxed. Not after I tickle him, though.
Stuck in this dance of light and shadow, Kaspar would remain silent, but not for long. As the weeks melted into months, Binder's very special brand of altruism allowed for a weirdly positive rapport to blossom between them, a phenomenon known as Stockholm Syndrome. Well, not back in the day. It's just known as... Stockholm Syndrome is weird. In consequence, Binder's unwavering patience and selfless commitment, as he would have called it, yielded unexpected results. It was during one of those questionably intimate moments that Kaspar, with eyes echoing untold horrors, began to communicate back. Though he would reply only with reluctant nods or subtle shakes of the head at first, he clearly comprehended some of the mayor's simpler questions, such as the grandiose offer of a pillow. This turn of events changed absolutely everything, as it shattered Carl Prio's assumption that the boy was some sort of animal. Kaspar was, in fact, very much human.
I must consume your soul to become a real boy.
Yeah, you could look at him, he's human, clearly. Binder, ever the beacon of moral consistency, promptly put an end to the exploitation of his protege, forbidding any further sightseeing tours through Lungisland Tower. This decision allowed Kaspar to prosper, although he remained locked up. His hesitant gestures rapidly evolved into rudimentary speech, though initially every spoken word would challenge his untrained voice considerably. Yet the range of his mental dictionary broadened steadily. What had started as meager baby talk turned into basic sentences, astonishingly fast, woven with increasingly sophisticated terms and grammatical structures. Looking at the more recent cases of children raised in extreme solitude, whose number is unfortunately greater than 0, no such rapid development had ever been recorded. Quite the opposite. Modern neurological research suggests that mastering the intricacies of human language becomes nearly impossible after a certain stage of brain development. Yes, this is what I thought. Although some of these unfortunate individuals might pick up a handful of phrases, true fluency will sadly elude them for life. Therefore, raising an eyebrow at Kaspar's steep learning curve is understandably justified. Nevertheless, it seems premature to label Kaspar a fraudster based on this argument, as people usually do. After all, he had been taught to read in his younger years, as mentioned in one of the letters. It's therefore quite plausible, perhaps even likely, that he was also exposed to spoken language at some point, even if this ability, in the absence of regular conversation partners, had then withered away over time. Yeah, this sounds pretty likely. Like, if you learn a second language, like, really well, and then you don't use it, you'll forget it, but then you'll learn it again really quickly. And maybe this is what has happened to him, just with his first language.
Only language you speak is failure.
Maybe he'd already been acquainted with the rudiments of German by the time of his arrival, with his initial silence being the result of paralyzing trauma. In any case, within a few more months, Kaspar's command of German became robust enough to recount his horrible upbringing to Binder, who hung on every word with bated breath, rapt with anticipation. For as long as his memory served, Kaspar explained, he had been confined to a dimly lit room, scarcely larger than the cell he now inhabited. Stone walls marked the borders of his world, as the low wooden ceiling constantly forced him into an agonizing posture, hovering somewhere between sitting and lying. Oh my god, for his whole life. Jesus. It's a horrible posture to be in. During his sleep, a mysterious hand would provide him with food and water through a small hatch in the ceiling, a hand he had managed to spot occasionally. Every once in a while, the water would bear a remarkably bitter tinge, upon which he would immediately fall into a deep slumber. On waking from the vivid fever dreams that usually ensued, he would find himself groomed, his hair and toenails trimmed, and his waste collected from a vessel. His sole companion in that haunting space, he explained, was a small wooden toy horse. That is Creepy dude. Keep this detail in mind, as it will re-emerge in a later chapter. Probably something to do with his wanting to become a cavalryman or something. Literally, the only thing he knows is walls and a horse and a hand and food. Kaspar's story confirmed other parts of the letter too. Another human being had indeed taught him to pen his name and read a few words. Yet interestingly, according to his recollections, this encounter had taken place not a long time ago, but rather recently. It must be noted, however, that a lifetime spent in a shallow dungeon had likely warped his perception of time beyond repair. To Jacob Binder, every piece of evidence and testimony neatly fell into place. A vague theory had nestled in his mind right from the outset, and every spoken word of Kaspar further condensed this hunch into serious conviction. By the mayor's reckoning, Kaspar was of noble ancestry, a lost prince in the most literal sense. Oh my god, really? Now, reconstructing the mayor's thought process proved challenging. On the surface, hardly anything hinted at this radical idea. His reasons for jumping to that conclusion remain largely speculative. Although the path ahead will be littered with suggestive hints and tantalizing evidence in support of this exact theory, no such clues have surfaced at this point. That is, not to my knowledge. Wait, couldn't we are his bones still around?
What did you say?
Can't we dig up his... This is super grim, but can't we dig up his bones? Bone! Harvest some of his DNA, and then compare it to, royal DNA that's also been harvested, and see what's up. We could get an answer to this, couldn't we? Unfortunately, the exact words exchanged between Kaspar and Binder have been washed away by the sands of time. For lack of surviving sources, we can only assume that the mayor had been thrown some breadcrumbs and inklings by Kaspar, which led him down this rabbit hole of a theory. Only one of Binder's deductions can be delineated. Kaspar's rapid cognitive and linguistic maturation bordered on the superhuman. It was a blazing trail of growth, typically spanning years, all compressed into mere hours of explosive development, as if each blink brought forth a new milestone, met and surpassed. Yeah, I think this is as I said earlier, it's as if you were teaching... It's as if, let's say you're a language teacher, and someone used to be fluent in a language, and they come to you, and they don't know how to speak the language. But they do, and they've just not told you. And you're teaching it to them again, they're going to pick it up insanely fast, and you're going to be like,
Whoa, you are a superhuman learner.
And no, I used to speak this fluently. Mystery solved.
Great job.
Obviously, such extraordinary intellectual prowess, in Binder's estimation at least, was reserved for the noble class, to which he happened to belong himself quite proudly at that. In his view, such brilliance could never emerge in a commoner. It was a privilege exclusive to his kind. Yes, because all brilliant people only come from brilliant stock.
I am the perfect being. I was.
I mean, of course genetics are a thing, but it doesn't work exclusively like that. There's also plenty of dense royals. As British people well know. Then again, maybe Binder simply had succumbed to his penchant for conspiracies and grandiose stories. Indeed, some other historical sources that speak of him, though not directly connected to the Hauser tale, do allude to his affinity for making up stories, especially those highlighting his personal importance. Notably, he resigned as mayor in 1853 after his clandestine web of secret families and a staggering dozen extramarital children came to light. Holy shit. Also, he said he once met a mermaid.
我刚才被人鱼绑架。
The pro be tripping. In any case, the leader of Bavaria's second largest township had become consumed by this belief beyond the point of no return. He would announce his findings through official proclamations, ordering formal edicts to be displayed near marketplaces, churches, and other locations of significance. Kaspar Hauser had been robbed of the advantages afforded by noble birth, the so-called Binder Decree stated, before retelling the dark story the mayor had learned from the alleged prince firsthand. Although not everyone was convinced by this version of events, it would instantly spread like wildfire, not only within city walls, but throughout the entire continent. The founding of Nuremberg turned into a medium-sized media sensation overnight. While some publications echoed the legend largely unchanged, most initial reports were openly skeptical, depicting Hauser as a clever conman who had successfully fooled an entire city and its magistrate. Well, and now you might be yelling, well, yes, obviously. But hold your horses, as the tides are about to change. Let us reserve our judgment until the entire tableau is laid out. I'm not that skeptical yet, and everyone who watches this show regularly knows I am the king of skepticism. And so far, I'm kind of inclined. Maybe he's part of the noble class. Do I think he's a prince? Seems pretty unlikely. There aren't that many princes. But I'm not willing to write it all off just yet, Dennis. And I'm the king of skepticism. Again, the specific reasons for Binder's remarkably early foresight remain undetermined. Yet the deeper we delve into this story, the more puzzle pieces will surface, some as recently as 2007. Even if things seemed a bit outlandish so far, they will gracefully snap into place, forming a somewhat convincing mosaic, a reasonable picture, gradually unblurring throughout the next 2 hours or so. Chapter 3: Mysterious Masteries. In an era riddled with political tumult and ceaseless crises, the announcement of harbouring a lost foreign prince inevitably ignited a maelstrom of curiosity amongst the higher echelons. King Ludwig I, who had regarded these events with a detached and fleeting amusement so far, now felt the weight of intrigue pressing down upon him personally. Imagine a US governor stepping before a throng of reporters declaring possession of Vladimir Putin's secret son. Such was the gravity and weirdness of the situation. Yet, this I think is unlikely. As I said, maybe he's a noble, but him being like a prince, that's some high-up nobility. Anselm von Feuerbach, who I briefly mentioned before, ultimately took it upon himself to shed light on this mess, though he committed to a less speculative approach. As Bavaria's most influential legal scholar and trusted royal advisor, his words bore a weight unmatched in the nation's justice system. In fact, many of his proposed law principles, such as abolishing torture, served as role models even beyond Bavaria's borders. What Mozart had been to music, Feuerbach was to German jurisprudence. Therefore, he was quite incentivized to save Mayor Mermaids and, by extension, the kingdom's international reputation. Now that Kaspar had unintentionally put Nuremberg into the center of European attention, he could no longer be held in a prison cell, a dehumanizing arrangement that Feuerbach never endorsed in the first place. Much to the protest of Binder, who was now rightfully worried about his remaining relevancy in this tale, Feuerbach ordered Kaspar to be moved to the island of Schut, putting him under the protection and care of Professor George Friedrich Daumer. Contrary to popular misconception, this was far from an exile. Schut was certainly no St. Helena, the far-flung island to which Napoleon was banished in 1815. Instead, it was merely a petite ribbon of land nestled within the Pegnitz River, bisecting Nuremberg and linked to the surrounding town by several bridges, none longer than 20 meters. It's like, yeah, he was exiled to an island in a river with bridges that people crossed all the time. There were a few restaurants there, a little lunch spot.
A roll, sir?
Screw you! Oatmeal?
Daumer, a close confidant of Feuerbach, gladly took Kaspar under his wing. As a former high school professor of both philosophy and religion, he was widely known for his deep intellect and vast knowledge that spread across various disciplines, but also for his philanthropy and kindness. The first encounter was one of curious observation. In the venerable and wood-beamed sanctuary of Dharma study, Kaspar was consumed by a whirlpool of awe and fear, adrift in a universe unfathomably stranger than any he had known. His fragile frame quaked as he tried to process 1,000 unfamiliar objects, endless rows of books and tomes, tall windows draped with velvets in rich burgundy, the flicker of a fireplace reflecting off lavishly crafted furniture, every detail revealing baffling complexities. Daumer took slow, careful steps towards Kaspar, as one might approach a skittish deer. His eyes, deep wells of benevolence and understanding, locked onto his guest as if to transmit a silent promise of safety. He presented his long hand, revealing a symbolic morsel of home, freshly baked bread. The room's cacophony softened as Daumer uttered words of reassurance, his voice a comforting low timbre. "Eat, young one. You are not in danger here." Kaspar timidly reached for the golden bread roll, still scanning his surroundings apprehensively, yet with a glimmer of nascent trust. As he tasted the warm, familiar yet new flavor, the overwhelming grandeur of the room seemed to fold into itself. It was as if at that moment, with that simple gesture of shared food, the vast world shrank to a more comprehensible size. During the following months, under the professor's empathic guidance, Kaspar continued his journey of discovery and learning. They began with the fundamentals of societal conventions, the art of wielding a fork, the mechanics of operating a doorknob, and the unspoken etiquette governing toilet outhouses.
Now, young one, I shall teach you how to use the Come hither!
Our understanding of his adjustment to daily life remains notably limited. Details emerge only sporadically and are mostly insubstantial. Daumer's elderly mother, living in the adjacent building, might have played a somewhat maternal role in Kaspar's subsequent upbringing. However, this theory remains open to interpretation, as it rests mainly on vague sideline remarks. In stark contrast, a robust body of evidence provides a tangible account of Kaspar's academic strides, as both Daumer and Feuerbach assiduously chronicled his formal education. The daily regimen started promptly each morning post-breakfast and prayer, focusing on the foundational tenets of literacy. As per Daumer's notes, Kaspar's initial attempts at holding a quill were clumsy, contradicting the writing capabilities he'd displayed months earlier. His fingers would tremble, and he would often smudge the ink, leaving blue splotches all over his palms. Well, that's completely understandable. If you can play, a song on the piano, but then someone's like, let's teach you something else, And if you're not, like, good at piano, then it's going to be pretty clumsy.
Press 1 key.
He just knew how to write one thing really well, and if you teach him something else, he's going to struggle. But with time and patience, his grip strengthened, and his strokes became more deliberate. In the afternoons, Daumer often read aloud to Kaspar, allowing him to hear the natural ebb and flow of language from lyric verses to Bible stories. Though initially struggling to grasp the nuances, Kaspar continued to pick up new words effortlessly. Easily. Before long, he would find delight even in Goethe and Schiller, Germany's most influential poets. Professor Daumer quickly recognized Kaspar's innate talents, but he was also surprised by Kaspar's desire for knowledge, as his protege demanded more and more lessons and lectures with a persistence unlike any of his previous students. A prodigy, perhaps. Daumer wrote, "What others learn in months, he accomplished in days." One day, he handed Kaspar a sketchbook and a set of charcoal pencils. Though rough initially, the lines he drew soon transformed into detailed renditions of the world around him, from fruits and flowers to the sparrows that often perched on the windowsill. In their quieter moments, the two would sit on the balcony of the manor, overlooking the glistening waters of the Pegnitz. While Daumer silently pondered on the mysteries of the universe, Kaspar would sketch the scene before them, capturing every ripple, every reflection with an artist's precision, which, at least to his mentor, revealed a deep emotional sensitivity. Okay. That is pushing me towards more of like the, what did he call him? A prodigy. Because like the language thing can be explained by the fact that he used to know the language. But learning how to draw with charcoal pencils like so quickly is pretty impressive. Just as the cryptic letter had foretold, Kaspar harbored a deep fascination for horses. Of course he did. It was the only thing he knew. He probably also harbored a fascination for bricks and hands.
He's out of line, but he's right.
Recognizing this, Daumer had arranged riding lessons for his foster child. Not long after, thanks to a natural affinity for riding, Kaspar was seated in the saddle with the poise of a seasoned knight, proud and graceful, or as Daumer put it, it seemed as if he could transmit his intentions to the horse through an unspoken mental connection.
It's okay.
I calmed you down, you arse.
This was likely not meant as a metaphor. Daumer noted several of Kaspar's skills that he speculated to be somewhat supernatural. For instance, his journals detailed his students' cat-like ability to discern vivid colors even in total darkness, or his ability to somehow sense movement within the radius of 125 steps. Then again, maybe this was the only logical consequence of a life spent within the shadows of a basement prison. After all, it is a well-established fact that when one sense is compromised, the others often intensify in compensation, a tendency well documented in scientific research. So, do these observations lend credibility to Kaspar's claims? Well, although Daumer held a high reputation within the academic circles of his era, his interests occasionally strayed into realms deemed somewhat eccentric even by his contemporaries. For example, he ardently believed that the majority of maladies, even the spectre of death itself, were merely manifestations of electromagnetic imbalances that could be cured through the therapeutic application of magnets. People still believe this. People still believe about like magnet therapy and crystal therapy and all of this bullshit. I mean, this guy's an excuse. It was 200 years ago. But people these days, there's like Facebook adverts for this. I turned off all the tracking for ads. You know how like when websites ask you, I always click no. I disabled all the cookies and stuff, so I just am not tracked with ads. I get ads for the weirdest shit now. And no, this is not a joke. Daumer had literally dabbled into magnet-based necromancy. Wait, talking to the dead? Is that necromancy?
Did that count as a question?
Yes.
Damn it.
Moreover, he passionately championed homeopathy, a branch of pseudoscience that is arguably even more insane. In other words, it appears that Daumer had been susceptible to false positives and non-existent effects and phenomena as long as they correspond to his personal assumptions and ideologies. None of the experiments he had conducted on Kaspar satisfied the demands of legitimate science, not even remotely. Therefore, we've got to take his findings with a metric ton of salt. To put it plainly, Daumer was bad. Crazy. In his book, The Character and Innocence of Kaspar Hauser, he devoted a whole chapter to undeniable miracles allegedly occurring during their intertwined time, putting Kaspar right up there with our Lord and Savior. His character was apparently flawless, his intelligence beyond human comprehension, his body near invulnerable, his senses finely attuned to every single data point around him, both physical and spiritual. Daumer's adulation of his student bordered on pathological obsession, and he made no effort to hide this infatuated attitude. To give you an idea, here are some questionable statements taken directly from his notes or later publications, sentences one should most definitely not write about a teenage boy. His mind possessed huge command over his limp yet sensitive body. The soles of his feet were soft, flawless and vulnerable. His beautiful heart was full of desire and passion. I could go on for a while, but I really don't want to. No, but it is like, it's the past. It's not like he's not being weird about it. It's just like the past. You might, I hope. You might wonder if certain unspeakable things were happening behind closed doors, which is a good question. To be fair, there's no direct evidence to support such allegations. I superficially read some of his unrelated publications to get a feel for Daumer as a person, quickly concluding that he had been a completely unhinged cringe virtuoso in general, but likely not an abuser.
Hello, Cotton. As you know, Valentine's Day is just around the proverbial corner of sorts.
Yeah, let's run with the assumption that people are not abusers, even if they write a bit weird. Yes, in any case, leaving an exploitable teenage boy at the mercy of a much older man without any real supervision seems a bit irresponsible to begin with. Again, this is 200 years ago. I'm sure this shit was happening all the time, wasn't it? Daumer taught Kaspar about personal hygiene, underwear, and even sex. All things considered, a queasy feeling remains. I don't know. It's like... He's kind of like, in a way, he's taking a parental role, if anything. I don't think this is... the way he's like, his limp body, his beautiful heart. It's like, I would say my kids have beautiful hearts. There's nothing weird about it. They just have beautiful hearts. Although to say it was full of desire and passion is a bit weird. But it was the past. It could mean different things. Also, as mentioned earlier, Daumer was first and foremost a Catholic scholar. Look, I'm obviously not alleging a link between Catholicism and child abuse. You're not, but many people would. But I absolutely will mention that a German court recently ruled it legal to call the Christian church a cult for kid because this term aligns with the known facts sufficiently. So yeah, holy German courts. Wow! Kaspar found sanctuary in the relative seclusion of Schutt Islands for nearly a year. The world beyond the river was mostly kept at bay, except for periodic visits from Feuerbach, who was engrossed not only in unraveling the mysteries of the enigmatic boy, but also in penning a forensic psychology study revolving around Kaspar's case and subsequent metamorphosis. Drawing from both Feuerbach and Daumer's notes, it seems evident that by the early months of 1829, Kaspar's mental state had completely realigns with what one might term normal, maybe even exceeding his peers in several regards. His German was flawless, his creative output astonishing, his knowledge about the world vastly above average, and his mental state mostly stable. Yet the shadows of his past remained tantalizingly elusive to him, with very few flashbacks ever bleeding through into the present. Honestly, kind of sounds like a good idea. Just maybe you should forget that shit and move on with your life, which has somehow come together. In early February 1829, however, the dormant corridors of Kaspar's memories suddenly flickered to life with a serendipitous dream. It granted him a vision, seemingly more than mere nocturnal whimsy. Quaking with excitement, he had sprung from his bed in the moonlit hours, seizing paper and charcoal with no second wasted, driven to capture the ephemeral glimpse into the past before it could fade from his inner eye. With the first rays of dawn, Kaspar, brimming in anticipation, presented his sketch to Daumer. It depicted a heraldic emblem akin to a coat of arms that had graced banners and shields of knights and kingdoms since the medieval ages. The drawing was surprisingly rich in detail. A bold cross dissected the canvas, dividing it into 4 distinct quadrants. Each was adorned with a specific regalia, diamond chevrons and slashes and a proud lion. Crossed swords hovered above, capped by a closed crown, iconography reserved for dukes of the highest order. The image radiated dominion. Daumer, ever the scholar, immediately set about combing through his vast library in search of a close enough match. His fingers danced across tomes and memorials for hours, yet to no avail. Kaspar's conviction remained unwavering as he begged Daumer to check his books a second and even a third time. With an impassioned fervor, he insisted that this was actually serious, but the pages held no answers for them. On his next visit, Daumer passed the sketch on to Feuerbach, who was well versed in such matters professionally and out of personal interest. Although it demanded some effort, Feuerbach would indeed strike a vein of insight. After days steeped in Munich State Library, he unearthed a connection that would immediately upend any of his previous assumptions. The banner belonged to Castle Bugen, drawing together 2 mysteries that until this very discovery he had regarded as entirely unrelated. But what if Kaspar Hauser was only a puzzle piece in a much larger affair? Wait, is this the castle with the dungeon that the thing with the message in the bottle was released from earlier?
No.
You see, Castle Bugen's owner at the time was none other than Archduke Karl Friedrich, the autocratic ruler of a sovereign state called Baden. He had once acquired it as a small gesture of love for his second wife, Catherine Louise of Hochberg, a name Feuerbach and many conspiracy aficionados were quite familiar with, as she'd been at the centre of a very delicate controversy. Chapter 4: Coup d'etat. As one might expect from a man in his influential position, Feuerbach was deeply entrenched in the German Confederation's political theatre. Therefore, a possible link between Castle Bugen and Kaspar Hauser made his mind race and his hands tremble, unable to turn his astonished gaze from the heraldic lexicon before him. With the delicate knowledge of an insider, he swiftly connected the dots to a persistent rumour that had been whispered among his ranks for ages, a rumour that had started 16 years before Hauser's emergence in Nuremberg. Which has got to be around the time of his birth, right? Mm-hmm. The Grand Duchy of Baden, located to the west of Bavaria, had been governed by the esteemed Zähringer lineage for years. In the complex tapestry of European politics, Baden stood as a beacon of power and influence, rivaled only by the might and wealth of Austria and Prussia, despite its much smaller territory. However, with the twilight of Archduke Karl Friedrich of Baden in 1812, after an awe-inspiring reign that had spanned 73 years, the future of Baden's rule grew strangely uncertain. The nation fell into a tangled dispute concerning its royal succession, an ideal breeding ground for intrigue. The crux of the issue lay in the late Archduke's unorthodox marital choices. His widow, Catherine Louise of Hochberg, was once a commoner, a scandal in itself, but as a side effect of this dishonourable marriage, her sons were not entitled to the keys of the kingdom, as long as they were breathing heirs of the former ruler's first marriage, which happened to be a union of equal status. As long as they're of the former... Oh, wow, okay, so not his kids, but the person who ruled before him.
Correct.
Unfortunately, the Duke's first marriage had been a fruitful one. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry. These are his kids? From a first marriage? Well, that makes sense, because they were younger anyway, no? Unfortunately, the Duke's first marriage had been a fruitful one, bearing 6 eligible descendants. So to divert the line of succession from the main branch to the Hochberg family, a tragic fate would have to befall each of these 6 royal-blooded sons and grandsons. As luck would have it, this is exactly how things played out, with some of these untimely demises shrouded in suspicious circumstances. What a strange coincidence. Yeah, exactly. The last and most tragic of these 6 deaths occurred on the 16th of October, 1812, mere days before the Archduke's own passing. The grandson in question lived for only 12 fleeting days before falling victim to a sudden respiratory failure. With his death, the main bloodline ended. Stephanie Bonaparte, the distraught mother, did not shy away from voicing her dark suspicions. Most poignantly, in a heartfelt letter she wrote to her adoptive father Napoleon, she revealed a sorrowful truth. After giving birth, she'd not been allowed even a single shared moment with her son for dubious reasons. Oh my, wait. This is him, isn't it? Like, in the conspiracy. This is him, and he didn't die, they just locked him in a basement. Also, she had been banned from attending the funeral, which was held in unusual secrecy. The crown was ultimately handed to Karl Ludwig Friedrich, the eldest son of the Hochberg side branch. This pattern of tragedies could hardly be chalked up to mere coincidence. It bore the clear hallmarks of a deliberate plot. Such whispers resonated widely at the time. Yet the populace still accepted their new sovereign as if nothing had happened. For what was the alternative? Challenging the ruling monarch's mother in court? Though only behind closed doors, Feuerbach had always sided with those sensing the tinge of a conspiracy. As a matter of fact, he was far from the only one giving weight to this perspective. One might argue that it had not even been considered a theory at all, but rather an open secret. As it would seem, the puppeteers of Baden had murdered every legitimate heir, including a baby, to force a shift in rulership. We will return to this later, but let's work under this assumption for now. Still, Feuerbach had always wondered about 2 obvious inconsistencies. Why, he pondered, was Stephanie Bonaparte kept at such a deliberate distance from a young prince, and why didn't they perform the expectedly opulent burial rites? These suspicious deviations from the norm did not contribute to the overarching plan in any way. But now that he was working on the Hauser case, a logical answer presented itself. What if the legitimate heir of the throne, for one reason or another, had not been murdered at all, but rather secretly relocated? What if they had buried an empty coffin, or alternatively the body of a different child? In other words, what if Kaspar Hauser was the grandson of Napoleon Bonaparte, the 6th legitimate heir of Archduke Karl Friedrich, and therefore the legitimate ruler of Baden? It's getting very Dan Brown, isn't it? How could Kaspar vividly remember the emblem of Bugen down to the smallest details if he hadn't been there? Well, by this point, right, he's been studying with this dude for ages. There's a huge library and such, and just because the dude didn't find it doesn't mean he hasn't seen it another way. If he drew it, like, much earlier, then that would be way more suspicious. Or, like, way more, not suspicious, but, like, indicative of something weird. And why would anyone hold him prisoner at said castle if it was not for some delicate cover-up? Bugen was rather small, secluded, and far away from Baden's populated areas, the perfect location for a sinister purpose. Startled by his insight, Feuerbach feverishly checked the records. The prince's supposed date of birth matched that of Kaspar Hauser. Not exactly, but it was alarmingly close. To summarize Feuerbach's working hypothesis, 16 years ago, Baden's conspirators urgently needed the prince removed from the power landscape, but, out of compassion perhaps, they spared the newborn's life by hiding him away in Castle Bugen, hoping that he'd never learn the truth about his importance. After a period of lying low and allowing the situation to stabilize, they fabricated 2 letters to cover their tracks before abandoning him in Bavaria, a considerable distance from the throne that was rightly his. You might argue it's a little far-fetched. Well, things are about to get weird. Yeah, I'd say this is conspiracy theory so far, but Dennis, I'm willing to be persuaded otherwise, let's see where it goes. To my knowledge, Feuerbach never set foot within Castle Bugen's walls, as he lacked the authority to do so. But modern-day historians and Hauser enthusiasts, drawn by the legends, have extensively probed Bugen's premises during the subsequent centuries, and they stumbled across something rather surprising. Long after Hauser, Feuerbach, and everyone else involved had passed, a rather enigmatic room was discovered in one of the castle's neglected and crumbling side buildings. It was a dungeon of sorts, remarkably shallow, devoid of any windows, and enclosed by impenetrable walls from every angle, with only a small slit allowing explorers to peek inside. The sole entrance, a trapdoor ensconced in the ceiling, was inaccessible for a rather suspicious reason. It had been masked with a blend of mortar and stone from the room above. Maybe this is ringing a bell. The call for an in-depth investigation was obviously immense. Nevertheless, the Heritage Protection Agency had thwarted every attempt to explore Bugen's Chamber of Secrets, invoking laws designed to safeguard historical sites. While other parts of the premises evolved, serving as an orphanage until 1985, followed by a stint as a Christian conference center, that specific wing remained untouchable, for the longest time off-limits to any research requiring construction tools. It was not until 2009 that a team of historians was finally permitted to breach the veiled trapdoor, an event televised in Germany and Switzerland. Inside was a small wooden horn. I'm just joking, but that would be like, oh my god, it's there!
My disappointment is immeasurable.
The relentless roar of the jackhammer tore through centuries of silence, slowly conceding to the tranquil hush that followed. As the dust slowly settled and the first sunlight in ages pierced the gloom, spectators far and near held their breath in anticipation. Yet to everyone's disappointment, the room proved underwhelming at first, with nothing to offer but years of dust and debris. But then, as eyes adjusted to its dimness, a profound curiosity emerged from the shadows. Oh my god, what if it's the horse? Etched into one of the walls, okay, it's not the horse. They discovered a faint drawing, bearing the innocent charm of a child's hand. It was the crude depiction of a toy horse. Oh my god, this is the next best thing. What the I mean, think about it. Almost 200 years after Kaspar Hauser had spoken of his wooden steed, a sketch of this very item was found in a room linked to the mystery through entirely different means, a room that eerily mirrored Kaspar's descriptions. Again, it's a very strange coincidence. Back in 1829, however, Feuerbach remained entirely oblivious to the dungeon and the equestrian drawing hidden within. I suppose his conviction would have increased tenfold had he somehow learned about it. Yeah, no doubt. This is making it seem less conspiracy theory and more like, oh my god, he was really in this room and he was carving a horse into the wall, because that's all he had. In contemporary times, Castle Bugen houses a quaint bed and breakfast alongside a comfy restaurant, both of them surprisingly budget-friendly given the luxurious charm and proximity to Basel, Switzerland's famously expensive cultural epicenter. If you enjoy fancy wine served by disturbingly attractive waiters that make you question your fragile sexuality, I can recommend a visit, even though Bugen's most interesting room remains inaccessible to visitors, even to begging ones, or so I've heard. However, the natural beauty of the neighbouring Rhine more than compensates. Indeed, the river is so close to the castle's walls that one can easily cast a small object, like a glass bottle perhaps, through an open window and watch it embark on a tranquil journey across gentle waters drifting northward into a region once called Alsace. Oh my. Okay then. Another point of considerable interest is Baden's royal crypt, of course, the alleged resting place of the newborn prince. According to Feuerbach's suspicions, there should be an empty coffin hiding amidst bygone monarchs. But alas, the secret might forever remain so. Feuerbach was obviously not allowed to check, and interestingly, as per the mandate of current lineage holders, the tomb chapel continues to be a forbidden vault of mysteries. Not a single researcher has ever been granted a glimpse inside. They could easily make all the accusations and rumors disappear immediately, but for nearly 200 years, they have maintained their decision not to do so. Not even I was allowed to Indiana Jones the out of the place, despite asking politely. It'd be awesome if you had. They'd be like, yeah, okay, we'll let you do it. Why not? Go crack open that coffin.
Do it.
Then again, this doesn't automatically imply that they're actually hiding something down there. Maybe they just don't feel like having a random YouTube writer messaging about the bones of their ancestors and potentially selling them on the black market, which is fair to some extent, I guess. Is the expectation that you'd steal the bones, Dennis? The boy who lived again. In the 1820s, vibrant emotions and a newfound sense of self-expression washed over society. More than a mere trend of creative connections, the artistic movement of Romanticism symbolized a rediscovery of beauty and imagination, passionately rebelling against the rigid dictates of pure reason that had defined the Enlightenment. The era brimmed with tales of folklore, where nymphs danced by moonlit rivers and ancient spirits whispered secrets to those who dared to listen. Every gust of wind carried a story, every rustling leaf a hidden message. Nature became not just a backdrop, but a character itself, alive, sensitive, pulsating with feelings, and bearing witness to the joys and sorrows of humanity. Poets, painters, and musicians embarked on the quest of mapping out their hearts and souls, and so did Kaspar Hauser. On the 26th of May, 1829, the anniversary of his release from captivity, he wrote a poem that could be translated as follows. Today I welcome my year one, with gratitude beneath the sun. Though burdened by so much strife, I vow to savor the delights of my life. But what may appear as an expression of inner fulfillment and genuine optimism revealed only half the story. The more Kaspar adapted to his present situation, the heavier the burden of not knowing his past. He had grown into a full person with tastes, desires, opinions, aspirations, talents, and quirks. Yet all of these human elements seemed to orbit a black void of nothingness. The absence of memories remained his defining characteristic. He often retreated into Daumer's garden, losing himself amongst the blooms and greenery, searching for solace. During one such moment of introspection, Daumer approached his student with a novel idea. In his hands, he held a small box of cress seeds. "Let's plant these," he said, with a glint in his eye and a gesture toward an empty garden bed. "But in the shape of your name. Watch them grow, and maybe in their sprouting, you'll find a piece of yourself." Some cryptic going down. Okay. Kaspar traced out the letters with a stick before filling the grooves, slowly and meticulously. Each following dawn found him kneeling among the tomatoes and lettuces, fingers brushing lightly over the cress sprouts, as if he were encouraging their efforts. As soon as the shoots began to spell Kaspar's name in the lush green, they served as a metaphorical mirror, reflecting his own blossoming self-awareness. Daumer believed that the magic of nature, with its unfathomable mysteries, might offer the answers Kaspar sought, and perhaps, in some ethereal way, it did. His dreams would suddenly become incredibly vivid, lifelike even, as if incited by the garden's whisperings. Once shrouded in dark obscurity, the ensuing nights adorned Kaspar's mind with colourful scenes, each unfolding with rich detail that sculpted tangible realities. Or, to be more precise, one particular reality. He would find himself in the marbled halls of an opulent palace, bathed in the soft golden light of arched windows, the air fragrant with the scent of burning sandalwood, and the distant sounds of a harpsichord wafting in from somewhere unseen. His younger, careless self ran through the corridors with unbridled joy, barefoot, his laughter echoing like the sweetest melody. The sound of giggling trailed him, and when glancing back, he would catch glimpses of a woman playfully chasing after him. Time and again, Kaspar would drift into this very location, each visit unveiling new details. The unique shape of brass door handles, rows of ornate knight armor standing sentinel, a grand chandelier hanging from the vaulted ceiling. Of course, Kaspar told his teacher about the recurring dreams, hoping he could help figure out their meaning. Were they a manifestation of inner yearning or echoes of a suppressed memory? Though Kaspar could not place those scenes anywhere on his biographical timeline without glaring contradictions, the lavish hallways had resonated with an unmistakable sense of authenticity, as if they were, against all logic, remnants of a profound and genuine childhood experience. To make sense of this mess, he would commit to a more systematic approach going forward, writing down every thought, every suppressed flashback, every diffuse feeling that might, by the slightest of chances, hold the key to proving his true identity. What had started as a personal diary quickly transformed into a comprehensive memoir, prompting Daumer to reshape Kaspar's scattered notes into something the world would hunger for, an autobiography. The editing process took him barely a few weeks to complete, ready to take the world by storm. Sure, the public's fascination with Kaspar had slightly ebbed away given his retreat from public view, but for the connoisseurs of intrigue, this suspicious absence only added layers to the mystery. According to most modern accounts, the book's release immediately ignited a firestorm of controversy. To some, it served as irrefutable proof of the era's most shocking scandal, while others dismissed it as an obvious fabrication, once again leveling accusations of fraud at Hauser and his publishers. This, however, strays very far from the historical truth. You see, for reasons not fully understood, Daumer had chosen not to release the guaranteed bestseller at the 11th hour. Instead, the only existing copy of the manuscript remained locked in Daumer's desk until his death, then journeyed through various custodians and private collections until it landed with the Dutch historian Antonius van der Linde, who first brought it to the public's attention in 1888, almost 6 decades later. Wow. Okay. I mean, why? He just didn't want the secret getting out, but I thought the whole thing, it was trying to find this out. It does also feel a bit like suspicious and
convenient,
doesn't it? Like, this all going on in quite a short period of time. Maybe this could all just be a ploy to get this guy, like, snuck into the royal family somehow and make him, like, king.
It's good to be the king.
As such, it was not the autobiography that made Kaspar reclaim the spotlight in 1829. Rather, a far more sinister event would put him back on the map. In the early morning hours of October the 17th, the silent shadow descended upon Daumer's peaceful abode. It was the shadow of an intruder, slinking onto the island unannounced, armed with the gleam of a butcher's knife and a grim purpose. The attack was swift and brutal. Before Kaspar could even register the lurking danger, the enshrouded cutthroat launched his attack, hurling the knife's blade directly at his forehead. The forceful impact sent Kaspar reeling, but he did not succumb. With a staggering effort, he regained his balance, a primal instinct guiding his flight toward the basement. "You need to die before leaving Nuremberg," the attacker yelled after him as he bolted downstairs without looking back. In the dim recesses of the cellar, amidst wine racks and dormant gardening tools, Kaspar found a temporary hiding spot, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm in his chest. Every nerve on high alert, he strained his ears, trying to decipher any hint of encroaching footsteps, anticipating the looming figure to finish his business any moment. Yet even as the seconds merged into minutes, the oppressive silence remained. Instead of pursuing his cornered prey, the assassin had simply left Kaspar behind, severely wounded, but very much alive. As mysteriously as he had arrived, the intruder vanished from Schutt, slipping away without a trace. Is this because someone fears, there's the rumor, right? And maybe this person is like, "I will protect the bloodline," or whatever. Like, they're not the real one. But, stop. You know what I mean.
I don't know.
Later that morning, as the sun streamed through the curtains, Daumer made his way to the kitchen, his mind blissfully unburdened. But as he passed the corridor leading to Kaspar's room, his foot halted, hovering mid-air, as his eyes locked onto a streak of blood spread across his otherwise pristine floors. The ominous crimson snaked its path toward the basement. Compelled by dread and determination, Daumer followed the trail downstairs, only to find a student lying on the ground with a serious wound to his head, barely conscious and hardly breathing. He wasted no time, sending one of his housekeepers to the nearest police ward. The house was soon abuzz with activity. While flocks of constables quickly searched the premises for the culprit, 2 on-duty physicians carefully tended to Kaspar. They cleaned and stitched the laceration with precise hands, occasionally exchanging relieved nods as they realized that Kaspar would be all right. Despite the dramatic looks, a quick examination revealed that the wound was far less grave than it appeared at first sight. The knife had struck him at a peculiar angle, more grazing his forehead than penetrating it. While he was indeed in a perilous state due to the substantial blood loss, the physical damage was manageable. Once the police officers had ensured the attacker's absence, they commenced a meticulous search for evidence. Some officers crouched low, passing the ground for footprints, while others focused on the windows, searching for any sign of forced entry. They investigated every corner, every nook, but nothing was found, and nobody had witnessed anything. It was as if the assailant had evaporated into thin air, or maybe as if he'd never been there at all. Their most viable lead turned out to be Kaspar himself. Still feeble and distraught, he tried to muster the strength to speak, but as he recounted the morning's ordeal, only one revelation stood out. The intruder's voice had been hauntingly familiar to him. Though his memories were obscured by headache and dizziness, he could not shake the nagging thought that perhaps, just perhaps, he had been the same individual who had abandoned him in Nuremberg 18 months ago. Well, why would they do that? Why would they come back and try and kill you if they originally set you free? That doesn't seem to make any sense. Although the town's administration had offered a reward of staggering proportions for any viable leads, the case was swiftly designated as unsolvable, relegated to bureaucratic purgatory mere days after the incident had occurred. The rationale behind this abrupt and quite questionable classification remaining unknown to this day. Off the record, however, police officials had quickly arrived at a theory realigning with their previous skepticism of Kaspar. In their view, there had been no attempted murder at all. The wound was likely self-inflicted, and interpretations shared by several modern criminological examinations. Okay, but what exactly guided them to this perspective? Well, I'm glad you asked. We didn't ask Dennis, but okay. Firstly, we need to probe the puzzling decisions made by Kaspar. Why retreat to the confined space of the basement, a literal dead end, rather than seeking the safety of the upper floors where Daumer and numerous house servants were sleeping? Sure, one might argue that rational thinking is a rare commodity in the moment of sheer panic, but strangely, Kaspar had not even cried out for help, thus defying the most basic of survival instincts. Secondly, we need to analyse the perplexing actions of the purported intruder, whose presence was marked by an absolute absence of evidence, if he had indeed existed. This individual must have been a veritable ninja with phantom-like abilities, highly skilled in the acts of stealth and intrusion, a professional hitman perhaps. Yet this theory crumbles when considering the alleged yelling the intruder had directed at Kaspar, an amateurish and unnecessary risk that could have betrayed a secret mission. Accordingly, it remains unexplained how Daumer, a known light sleeper, remained undisturbed throughout the quite vocal encounter that had unfolded right below his bedroom. Also, there is obviously no explanation for why the mission had been aborted just shy of its certain success. It does seem very suspicious, doesn't it? But there's even more. Forensic consultant Johann Zimmermann, after assessing Kaspar's injuries on behalf of the police, noted several more discrepancies between the official story and his observations. According to his documentation, which took me ages to track down, the wound had resulted from a clean and precise cut, entirely inconsistent with the deep and ragged lacerations that one would expect from a blunt impact. Zimmermann also highlighted the disproportionate amount of blood at the crime scene, suggesting that Kaspar might have deliberately smeared his bodily fluids everywhere, willfully creating a macabre trail for Daumer to quickly spot and follow. This does seem very suspicious. Whenever modern people like criminologists and stuff are getting involved, like let's test the bones for DNA and stuff, it's like, I take it so seriously because of like the years, decades, centuries of scientific method. Strangely, almost no one seemed to care about these urgent caveats. Barely a handful of moderately influential individuals had voiced their doubts publicly at the time. Among them, for example, was Johann Merker, a police administrator from Prussia. Though he was never involved with the investigation in any official capacity, he had remotely worked on the case as a hobby, releasing a 93-page summary of his findings under the title Kaspar Hauser, Likely a Fraudster, to an audience of like 3.5 people, one of whom was me. Despite the overabundance of red flags, words of doubt played no major role in the public discourse anymore. With the combined naivete of well-known figures like Binder, Daumer, and Feuerbach, it was ultimately Kaspar's version of events that gradually morphed into the universally accepted truth, firmly establishing his claim to the throne of Baden in Bavaria's collective consciousness. After all, why else would they send an assassin with orders to silence him? It certainly made for a conclusive narrative. Initially, the plotters had not anticipated Kaspar ever learning the secret of his birthright. Yet, after Feuerbach's unforeseen discovery, the puppeteers had been compelled to immediately take action, mitigating damage by employing accordingly desperate measures. Obviously, Baden's diplomats refuted any such allegations, yet to many, their denial only further validated the theories. The sacred path of Bullshido. In wake of Kaspar's supposed near-death experience, a pervasive gloom hung over Schutt Island, as if a dark veil had been cast upon it. The once lively abode, resounding with the warm tones of laughter and learning, was now dominated by the tired creaks of the professor's ceaseless pacing, a constant obsessive patrol from room to room, tracing imaginary threats that lurked in every nook and cranny. To him, the terrifying assassination attempt bore no ambiguity. It had fiercely clawed into Daumer's reality, leaving him deeply traumatized and fearing for both Kaspar's and his own life. His sunshiny habit of finding beauty in everything had faded, leaving fertile soil for paranoia to grow roots in his daily thoughts. Every passing stranger looked like yet another murderer to him. Every parcel at his doorstep reeked of potential poison, and every knock at the door turned into a harbinger of doom. During the day, he would immerse himself in pseudo-druidic rituals of protection that were both elaborate and nonsensical. With the descent of night, he took a stealthy post behind the curtain-draped windows, his eyes scouring the island's contours for any hints of hidden movement. It wasn't long before the scholar, a fragile man of fine sensitivities, had been reduced to a phantasm of his former self, tormented by an ever-churning sea of what-ifs. In stark contrast, Kaspar recovered from his harrowing encounter with astonishing ease, as though it had been but a minor inconvenience. His wound faded without leaving a scar, neither on his forehead nor on his soul. Within mere days of the ordeal, his eyes had regained their sparkle and danced with the usual vibrant light, whereas Daumer's gaze had morphed into a haunted and hollow mask. The breaking point followed shortly after, when Kaspar inadvertently sent a silver plate crashing to the ground, prompting his mentor to grab a knife and rush to the scene. This simple accident had unspooled the senior's last threads of courage, leaving him pale, breathless, and wide-eyed in Kaspar's doorway, his limbs trembling with fear. Although Kaspar apologized profusely, the moment served as a subtle acknowledgement of a truth that they'd both been avoiding. Daumer could no longer stand as Kaspar's protector. His nerves were too frayed, the weight of constant anxiety too heavy on his shoulders. And so, under the old oak that had witnessed their happiest moments together, they shook hands for a final goodbye in early January of 1930, a gesture of mutual gratitude that nearly broke the older man's heart. Through the direct intervention of King Ludwig, Kaspar was swiftly entrusted to the care of Johann Bieberbach, a Nuremberg alderman who lived a rather solitary life on the town's outskirts. His secluded home was nestled near the Tannenloher Woods. We know next to nothing about Bieberbach himself, as not even Google seems to be overly aware of him. Most search results refer to entirely unrelated individuals named Johann, who happen to live in the modern-day village of Bieberbach. Other entries lead to a 1908 novel written by Jacob Wasserman, which is indeed based on Kaspar Hauser's life, but in a highly fictionalized and weirdly erotic way. Okay. Old-school erotica about this dude.
Can you not judge me for like 2 seconds?
I managed to unearth only a single mention of the actual Johann Bieberbach, hidden in a 1974 research paper which randomly fell into my hands while scouring the Bavarian State Library. The paragraph mentions that Bieberbach had been a tradesman, and apparently he had offered to pay for Kaspar's expenses out of his own pocket. The author of this paper, a historian named Fritz Trautz, sadly chose not to cite any sources for this, so I hit a dead end immediately. Although Bieberbach remains a rather nondescript character to us, the patronage of Kaspar is a matter of indisputed public record, and it marked a dramatic change for the worse. While Daumer's magically romanticized worldview had fostered a rather liberal style of teaching, this new environment was governed by a harsh regime of unyielding expectations and moral conservatism, offering little in the way of freedom and enjoyment. Kaspar quickly learns that his future would be one of discipline and total control, with every moment of his life judged by Bieberbach's draconian policies. Amplifying the already stern conditions, he was also burdened with the unwavering vigilance of King Ludwig himself. Keen to avoid additional sensationalism, the monarch had commanded the royal guard to follow Kaspar's every steps and monitor his every action, thus obliterating even the faintest semblance of privacy. Some sources claim that this measure was invoked with Kaspar's welfare in mind, intended to avert a second attempt on his life. Over here in the real world, however, the monarchy had likely sided with the police's unofficial findings rather than buying into the widespread narrative. Though we have no surviving documents directly confirming King Ludwig's skepticism, it stands to reason that he was among those highly doubting the first attack, therefore constraining Kaspar to a tight leash mainly to keep his bull in check. Yet despite these efforts, it would take less than half a year for the next bloody incident to occur. On the brisk morning of April the 3rd, 1830, the sharp crack of gunfire erupted from within Bieberbach's private library. Almost instantaneously, on-duty soldiers surged through the door, finding a somewhat dazed Kaspar sprawled out on the floor. Shaking off his stupor with commendable speed, truly an artist of resilience, Kaspar gifted them with the all-time classic of "I can explain everything," asserting that the discharge had been nothing more than a minor accident born of his clumsiness. Mind you, his explanation was nothing short of a masterclass in crafting firearm discharge narratives. In case you're planning to accidentally shoot someone, feel free to take note for future reference. So, according to his words, Kaspar had been trying to fetch a book from a high shelf while balancing on a rocking chair when he suddenly lost his footing. In a frantic bid to steady himself, he grabbed onto a decorative rifle mounted on the wall. Unfortunately, its supporting nut failed, resulting in a domino effect, sending him and the rifle crashing hard to the floor. To his horror, the rifle went off on impact, narrowly missing his head, but leaving a cut near his right temple as testimony. Why? If this is set up, which it seems likely to be, why? Why would you do this? Bieberbach, however, after slogging through the tale with the enthusiasm of a snail at a salt convention, dismissed the story outright by pointing out an obvious flaw. Old rifles could indeed accidentally fire when dropped, but only if the bolt had been manually cocked beforehand, which was a 3-step process with this specific model, a Harper's Ferry M1803. Nonetheless, the situation demanded an official investigation. Nuremberg's medical examiner, Johann Zimmermann, was once again dragged in, tasked with evaluating Kaspar's near-fatal ouchie. With the kind of experience that only comes from seeing the worst war injuries imaginable, he quickly pointed out clear differences between the minor abrasion before him and those of genuine gunshot wounds, effectively debunking the claims a second time. Wait, so he just cut himself or whatever? People are going to know, dude. To his professional eyes, the superficial and entirely harmless bruise had likely been the dramatic result of a vicious attack by Kaspar's own fingernail. Dude, come on. Viewing the scene through lens of reason, only one plausible interpretation emerges. I can't think of one. What's the motivation here? Kaspar had scratched his skin intentionally before cocking and firing the weapon with just as much calculation. He then hastily lay down, ready for the guards to discover him. But if he had indeed fabricated the scene, one might wonder about his underlying motive. Yeah, I mean, the scene is like we know what happened. Why the motive is a mystery?
We're here to solve a mystery?
Simply a trick to garner attention, perhaps? Well, certainly possible. Some historians went even further, suspecting a double-layered ruse. What if Kaspar had crafted an implausible tale by choice, a flimsy lie designed to be seen through? This way, he seamlessly steered everyone towards an equally untrue but more dramatic implication, one that I cannot spell out on YouTube. Okay, that he wanted to off himself, right? Also, there might be yet another telltale peculiarity to consider, although, admittedly, I could be reading too much into it. You see, George Friedrich, not a creep Daumer, had never ceased chronicling Kaspar's life in questionable detail, even after their paths had diverged for good. In his book, Notes About Kaspar Hauser, Daumer recounts a fierce dispute between Bieberbach and Kaspar, triggering the discovery that Kaspar had been skipping classes with Albert Baumer, a private Latin tutor. Upon being confronted, Kaspar slammed his fists onto the table and, raising a voice laden with despair, shouted, "If you treat me like this, I don't want to live anymore." This event preceded the rifle accident by merely 2 days. Not a coincidence, if you ask me. Nope, that sounds pretty thing. I think he was faking a suicide attempt to, make people take this seriously. Maybe the act was not about attention, but about pity, an attempt to soften Bieberbach's heart. Then again, how could Kaspar have possibly skipped his lessons in the first place, given the ever-present Royal Guards? Guess we'll never know. Just like Daumer before him, Bieberbach eventually decided to sever all ties with Kaspar, albeit for vastly different reasons. His decision was rooted neither in fear nor benevolence. Rather, it had been born out of sheer frustration with Kaspar's incessant nonsense. While the specifics remain regrettably scarce, one can reasonably infer that a series of similar incidents have progressively eroded the foundations of their relationship. Interested in an example? Well, we know of one particularly strange incident in which Kaspar had randomly discovered a Hungarian book hidden within Bieberbach's collection. For some reason, he immediately asserted to recognize some of the words, implying yet another unexpected epiphany regarding its possible origin. However, when Bieberbach revealed himself to be fluent in Hungarian, challenging Kaspar to translate the parts he claimed to know, the latter fell mysteriously silent, sheepishly returning the book to its shelf. Busted. In the summer of 1830, after the last bit of trust had vaporized, Bieberbach kicked Kaspar out. A welcome conclusion for both parties, I suppose. I'm beginning to think that Kaspar's a bit of a con man. I'm coming around to that opinion. The Fresh Prince of Nuremberg. A visit to present-day Nuremberg is thoroughly confusing and, frankly, a bit misleading. Upon exiting the main train station, you're immediately greeted by an 8-lane beltway, a dreary, loud, and rather hostile first impression. But once you've crossed under the raging torrent made from asphalt and pragmatism, you'll find yourself whisked away to a bygone era, or several bygone eras. Again, it's a bit confusing. This is how I feel. The main train station in Prague, it's a really nice old building, and it's really beautiful inside. And your train pulls in, and the first impression you get upon leaving that train station is you enter a park, and you might think, oh, that's nice. This park is just filled with homeless people and drug addicts, and I'm fairly sure at night it's going to be filled with sex workers. It is the dreariest park, and it's kind of scary. And it's like, why wouldn't someone clear up this park and clear sounds very
oh, they're spoiling my beautiful city.
But it's come on now. This is the first impression that people get on arriving by train to this city. And it's just a park filled with drug addicts. And you're like,
this isn't good. This isn't a good vibe.
To your left stands a beautifully preserved castle, complete with a moat and watchtowers, in whose courtyard, tiny market stalls and workshops offer their handicrafts akin to a medieval market festival that never ends. Continue northward along the town wall, and the cobblestone alleyways will take you past half-timbered houses of inconsistent shapes and sizes, leaning snugly onto each other, with every wooden beam bearing the distinct touch of a different medieval carpenter. Yet, had you decided to turn right instead, you would now be immersed in a Renaissance avenue, lined with opulent multi-story residences on either side, interspersed with ornate pilasters and gilded balustrades that strangely seem to hint more at Baroque origin. As you stroll further, you'll encounter churches that whisper of the late 18th century, until of course you stumble upon yet another castle with a design that betrays an age of at least 700 years. And it's at this point that I have to mention that our video is sponsored by the city of Nuremberg. It's not, but it feels like it. Historical landmarks beckon you from every corner, angled and convoluted, cobbled together with random elements taken from every conceivable phase of European history, as long as they emit a diffuse sense of nostalgia. With its ancient charm and allure so pronounced and its chronological consistency so wrong, one might mistake Nuremberg for a meticulously crafted amusement park. Only one caveat: Nuremberg is actually just that. Wait, I've never been to Nuremberg. What's it like? I guess it's like this. I'm a little bit confused.
I'm into it.
You see, with barely any exception, everything in this town is a modern forgery. No way, really? Though you might be under the impression of strolling through an authentic piece of living history, you're nothing but a tourist falling for an illusion. Interested in visiting Lugersland Prison Tower? Well, feel free to admire this somewhat credible replica constructed in 1981. Are you in for the aesthetics of 15th century Gothic churches? Well, here's a building that is not the famous St. Lorenz Cathedral, but it certainly looks like it, as long as you don't look too closely. Why would they do this? Europe, you don't need to fake European history. There's plenty of European history.
Hold on.
Yet remarkably, through some mysterious providence, one structure evaded the brunt of the war's devastation. Oh, there we go, because it was destroyed in the war. It needed to be rebuilt. It's like when you're walking through London and there's this like beautiful like old row of like, you know, nice houses, terrace houses or whatever. And then you just see like two of them that are kind of crappy and don't have any of the nice brickwork or like ornamenting stuff on the outside. And it's like, yeah, because those ones were blown up with a bomb and they've just been replaced with like a cheap alternative. And by cheap, I'm sure it's still enormously expensive because it's London. I guess you can tell where this is going. On January the 2nd, 1945, just after sunset, a fleet of several American B-17 squadrons had dropped a total of 6,000 bombs onto the town, largely burning it to the ground within half an hour. Apart from Dresden, no other German city had been attacked this severely during the war. By the next morning, Nuremberg was basically gone, with 92% of the structures leveled and the rest largely disfigured beyond repair, compelling architects of subsequent generations to attempt recapturing Nuremberg's original essence, partially from memory, and therefore with a degree of historical inconsistency. Yet remarkably, through some mysterious providence, one structure evaded the brunt of the war's destruction, with only some minor roof damage caused by the nearby impact of a phosphorus bomb. The Tucher mansion somehow survived not only this attack, but the entirety of Hitler's atrocious reign and the time since. Tucher Mansion is a site of multifaceted importance, serving as a focal point to many obscure stories. Among the narrative threads running through the hallways, one belongs to Kaspar Hauser, of course, who took up residence there in 1830 after Bieberberg had politely asked him to off. The manor's esteemed proprietors, the Tucher family, are quite a notable lineage of patrician merchants, not royal, yet nearly as powerful. First mentioned in 1305, their trade dynasty had expanded massively throughout half a millennium, a meteoric rise culminating in the type of wealth that one can no longer imagine. At their zenith in the early 19th century, scarcely any economic sectors in southeast Germany remained out of their reach. It is therefore self-evident that they ranked among the era's most influential people, or in other words, they were best buddies with both the king and Feuerbach. Yeah, it's interesting, like in the part, you think there's like rich people today, like Bill Gates and Elon Musk and all this shit. But it's like back in the day, like comparatively, there were people, it's like, oh yeah, no, that guy's responsible for like 10% of the economy. It's like, that's money. Even today, Nuremberg is teeming with the Tucher name and their controversial emblem, which many argue is a bit racist. You could, for example, stroll down the Tucher Street and sip a Tucher brand beer at the Tucher pub, or savour an admittedly delicious roast venison a la Tucher at the Tucher restaurant near the Tucherland indoor playground before treating yourself at the Dr. Tucher's all-you-can-eat pharmacy. What is going on? Why would there be an all-you-can-eat?
Hello there. Yes, morphine, please.
How much?
As much as I can take.
Also, I've got a picture of their emblem here. I'm putting it on the screen now. If you're listening, and I'm not going to describe it. If you're listening in a podcast form, you just have to go and check out the YouTube video, won't you? Or just use Google. It's spelled Tucher. Although I obviously made up that last one, about the all-you-can-eat pharmacy, okay, it cannot be understated that Nuremberg's culture and landscape is still heavily shaped by businesses, either owned or associated with the Tucher family. Gottlieb van Tucher, the family's patriarch during Kaspar's time, is a particularly interesting figure. Holding degrees in law, mathematics, physics, philosophy, and music, acquired at a plethora of prestigious universities, his intellect was not so easily fooled, making him the ideal countermeasure for Kaspar's incessant shenanigans. Though I could not pinpoint a primary source for definitive confirmation, indications suggest that Feuerbach had likely tried to bestow Kaspar upon the Tuchers at least once before, yet initially his proposal was met with a non-negotiable rejection. This time, however, for reasons unclear to me, they give in and assumed legal guardianship over Kaspar, albeit with certain reservations. Wait, so they thought this guy was a con man from the beginning, and then they're like, Fine, we'll take him! Understandably afraid of impending scandals, Gottlieb von Tucher tried his best to hide Kaspar away, mostly confining him to his room. At least that is what historians had long believed to be true, given the absence of any sources mentioning Kaspar during the subsequent months. However, in 2013, historian Michael Diefenbacher challenged this perspective by unveiling newly rediscovered documents depicting a vastly different scenario. As we now understand, Kaspar spent time with multiple branches of the Tucher family, many of whom resided outside of Nuremberg. Among his temporary guardians was even Maria Helena Susanna Tucher, the wife of philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, who stands out as one of Germany's most influential thinkers alongside Kant and Marx. Kaspar and Hegel probably crossed paths, but curiously, Hegel never referenced their encounter in his vast collection of preserved notes and letters. Quite disappointing. As a philosophy graduate myself, I can affirm that both of them were, as the younger generation would phrase it, full of Their interaction would have been a compelling read, the intellectual equivalent of watching two toddlers competing in an MMA cage fight. In any case, Kaspar's time with the Tucher family was certainly not the period of borderline abusive imprisonment we once considered it to be. Oh no, it had been quite the opposite in fact. Kaspar enjoyed the glamorous life of immense privilege, moved among the finer social circles, indulged in endless feasts and exquisite banquets, and given his intriguing background, he was well liked by the rich and beautiful. According to author Schriebmuller, in his review of 150 years of Kaspar Hauser research, Kaspar lived like royalty. Every extravagance the 19th century had to offer was available to him. This dude's doing well. He is like, I am kind of coming around to the fact that he's probably a con man. And he's a good con man. He conned himself into not royalty. He's basically worked out a way to live like it. That is, with one notable exception. Despite an overabundance of opportunities, Kaspar never showed any interest in women, preferring materialistic charms over female affection. And in materialistic terms, he lacked absolutely nothing. The Tuchers were so offensively wealthy that they owned separate tea rooms for different types of tea. Crazy. A fact that is not true at all, but it sets the narrative. It sets the narrative. Oh, I really wanted that to be true. Oh, that's great. What's that? That's the Earl Grey room. That's great. Quite an impressive climb on the social ladder, and a fast one at that. Within roughly 2 years, a literal nobody, a half-prisoner, half-circus animal, had made it to the highest echelons of German society, with influential friends throwing themselves at him left and right. Somewhat ironically, Kaspar indeed turned into a prince of sorts, though not by the means of an inherited bloodline, but by good old-fashioned money. Through Feuerbach's assistance, he had even attained a position as a courthouse copyist, not the most prestigious job, yet undoubtedly a stepping stone that reeked of privilege. Destiny had granted Kaspar access to many golden opportunities and illustrious characters for sure, yet one of his closest friends stands out. Earl Philip Stanhope, a British nobleman, politician, and regular business partner of the Tuchers. For some odd reason, Stanhope is often depicted as an agent of Baden, a spy, so to speak, sent on a mission to garner Kaspar's friendship and trust. The original, that guy's on a wild goose chase. Why is he going after this guy? He's not that interesting. He's just a con man, in my opinion. The original source for this wild and very erroneous claim seems to be a low-budget and low-effort TV documentary from 1999. Okay. It's like, what's the motivation? Come on. Which led to a cascade of circular references. In truth, he did not have a relationship with the rulers of Baden at all. It is safe to assume Stanhope I'm sorry. I'm being an idiot. Barden is I forgot that because this episode's been really long and it's actually day 2 of me recording this. So you're probably like,
Simon, what are you talking about? Barden is the place where he's pretending to be the prince from and whatnot.
And it's like, yes, I just remembered I recorded that bit yesterday. I'm sorry. Anyway, he didn't have a relationship with the rulers of Baden at all. It's safe to assume that Stanhope and Kaspar first met at one of the lavish festivities at Tuchem Mansion, either in April or May of 1831. The British Earl was a man of joy and extravagance, often seen in colourful and fancy clothes, not quite in line with the demure fashions of the time. Amidst a room filled with flawless manners and polite moderation, he was a burst of vivid energy, a peacock among sparrows, drawing curious glances and indignant stares upon him. As the only non-boring entities present, it was inevitable that he and Kaspar would gravitate toward each other, losing themselves in a conversation governed by mutual fascination. Stanhope spoke of his life as a globe-trotting salesman, his words painting vibrant pictures of distant cultures and thrilling adventures. Kaspar, in return, presented his own curious tale in rich detail, including his claim to Baden's throne. Despite their story's incredulous nature, each accepted the other's tall tales without the slightest pinch of doubt. Though separated by a substantial age gap of 33 years, their bonds flourished into a pivotal element in both their lives. Stanhope's trips to Nuremberg grew rather frequent, suspiciously frequent, one might say, and he spared no expense in lavishing Kaspar with extravagant gifts, including the finest attire from France and unparalleled British art, masterfully robbed from the colony's greatest artists. Yet, even while business duties called Stanhope afar, the two kept in touch through a steady exchange of letters, ensuring their bond remained strong irrespective of borders. Most of those letters still exist within Nuremberg's archive, and much to my surprise, they are not nearly as romantically charged as I had somewhat expected. Yes, I was totally expecting it to be like, oh, they've got some forbidden relationship. While they are in fact extremely personal and drenched with emotion, we must remember that this was the norm during the era of European Romanticism, which was aptly named for this reason. While certain interests beyond friendship cannot be ruled out entirely, the few ambiguous remarks at hand do not add up to reliable evidence of child abuse, not in the strict sense at least. Wait, how old is he? 33? I thought he was an adult by this point. Okay, Jesus. Sure, many historians have pointed out that Kaspar, among other telltale signs, concluded his letters with "in love" or similar expressions. Although it might be tempting to take this literally for the sake of a more captivating story, I must once again emphasize that during this time, these phrases were commonly used as a generic all-purpose sign-off among friends. For comparison, Schiller's writings to Goethe seem considerably more passionate. Despite having an exclusively professional relationship, he ended his letters with thirsty stuff like, "If you are at home tomorrow, evening and in the mood, I will discreetly invite myself to your house, for I long to see you again." Oh my god, if someone wrote that today, there is no doubting what that means. But back in the day, apparently this was just cool. It'd be like,
"Yes, and I'll see you at the office tomorrow, Bob. And if you're home tonight, I shall slip into your bed and slip..."
Don't go there, Simon. Still, Kaspar had been barely 17 when he met the 50-year-old Stanhope. While some details remain a bit murky and subject to interpretation, it seems fair to view the situation holistically and call Stanhope's overall behaviour by its name. It was clearly grooming. He's 17 though, and I know that it's like adult is 18 today, but this was 200 years ago. Would it really be considered I guess grooming doesn't necessarily just mean underage, does it? Does it?
Why are you the way that you are?
Again, he had relentlessly showered his underage buddy with expensive presents and promises, displaying that specific uncanny blend of fatherly devotion and relatable companionship often found in adults with certain unspeakable intentions. I don't want to dig myself in a hole here, but this was the past and he's 17. And yeah, the dude's way too old. But it also, if it's just friendship, is... Okay, I don't know. Let's see where this goes. And their relationship was indeed very illegal by 1830s laws. Wait, but this wasn't a sexual relationship. As far like we have their letters. They were not romantic. They were platonic, weren't they? What's going on? Though unfortunately not because of the possible dangers to children, as the Bavarian age of consent was and still is 14. No shot. Really? In Germany, what are you up to? No, it was a crime due to its homosexual implications. But that's all they were just implications. What's going on? Which the law called an unnatural vice until 1969. I think we've mentioned this before, but the past was the worst. Either way, it sounds like in Germany, the present is still the worst. 14? Like, what the... Like, I know Americans, which is the majority of this audience, have that very 18 years old and then it's one day over or one day under. It's it becomes complicated. It doesn't really work that way in Europe as far as I understand. But 14, my dudes? Jesus Christ. Either way, Stanhope became and remained Kaspar's closest confidant, but also a threat to his dance of decadence in a way that might surprise. Chapter 8. Lost in Translation. As far as we can tell, Kaspar's life remained surprisingly uneventful for the next 18 months, a time he spent enjoying the view from the top of the world. There was no attempted stabbing, no whoopsie involving a firearm, not even a single nocturnal epiphany revealing cryptic symbolism. In turn, Feuerbach's investigation efforts made barely any progress, despite him committing every ounce of energy to the project. Yet if the years spent in courtrooms had taught him one thing, it was this. It is often the smallest details that reveal the most astonishing truths. So when Kaspar continued to boast boldly, breaking bread with bourgeoisie business barons, Feuerbach meticulously revisited each and every piece of evidence, regardless of its apparent relevance. One question that persistently occupied Feuerbach's musings was Kaspar's reported knowledge of the Hungarian language. As you might recall, it first raised this claim to Bieberbach in 1830, but when put to the test, they were forced to set their counter of days since the last cringe-related accidents back to 0. Yeah, it was so cringe. I recorded this yesterday, but he was like... I'm just remembering it and how cringe it was, where he's like, oh yes, no, I know some of these words. And the guy's just like, well, I speak Hungarian. How about that one? Tell me what they mean. Oh, cringe. He's like a teenager, though. It's okay to be a bit cringe when you're a teenager. You would think that this blunder had served him a humble lesson in honesty, but sure enough, Kaspar would later confess his alleged Hungarian proficiency to Earl Stanhope, perhaps trying to impress his broad-minded friend with a bit of cosmopolitan experience of his own. Feuerbach, informed of Kaspar's renewed claims through mysterious means, promptly seized the chance and orchestrated a redemptive opportunity. He proposed to get together with actual native speakers, intended to conclusively substantiate the hypothesis. To my astonishment, not only did Kaspar willingly participate, but he also showcased surprisingly convincing results, leaving little room for doubt. Well, yeah, he's gone and learned Hungarian, which, I mean, is a dedication. He's a con man. That's what he does. He slips into other people's into the other people's skins. Not literally. Obviously not literally. But you know what I mean. He becomes someone else. That's what I'm trying to say. He would, for example, prove his ability to count in Hungarian up to the impressive number of 3. And wouldn't you know it, he was also able to understand both the words apa and anya, which translate to father and mother respectively. But all irony aside, I actually did discover some additional, slightly less absurd hints scattered across available sources, and here's a quick rundown. In June 1830, police director Eduard Hitzig published a book titled Annals of Criminal Jurisprudence. Within its pages, he cited a letter from a certain Lieutenant von Perch, who had once interviewed Kaspar in an official capacity. In a passing remark, Perch noted Kaspar's ability to understand many words from behind the Daumer forest, alluding to the Habsburg Empire, which at this time encompassed the territory of what is now Hungary. In Revelations about Kaspar Hauser, Daumer recounted an episode in which Kaspar crossed paths with an unnamed friend of Bieberbach who had visited in early 1830. Daumer noted not only Kaspar's pronounced reaction to them speaking Hungarian, but also described Kaspar's equally strong emotions upon hearing Polish words, a language distinct yet closely related to Hungarian. Oh, I thought there were no languages closely related to Hungarian. I remember I went to Hungary and I took a tour, where they walk you around the city and they tell you all these interesting things about the city or whatever. And they were like, yeah, Hungarian. There's no related languages. So when they have aliens in movies and they don't want to come up with their own alien language, apparently they use Hungarian. They just have the actors do their best impression of Hungarian or whatever. And so when international movies about aliens come to Hungary, they have to redub over the language because otherwise all the Hungarians are like,
bro, why do the aliens speak Hungarian? We can understand the aliens.
Johann Merker mentioned the same story in his aggressively skeptical dirt-dishing expose, though it might be possible that one of them had simply copied the other without proper attribution. Incidentally, both were factually mistaken. While Poland and Hungary have always shared deep cultural ties, their languages stem from entirely different linguistic roots. Yes, I thought so. Okay, wait, so this is just what someone wrote. Oh, Daumer noted about the languages being similar. However, I know that that's wrong, and I know nothing about languages.
You know nothing.
Polish is a Slavic language, whereas Hungarian belongs to the Finno-Ugric family. Few languages on our planet are as different as these two. Another interesting anecdote comes from a certain Daumer, apparently a descendant of Hungarian immigrants who had once cursed in his mother tongue with Kaspar present. The latter, in a state of visible shock, responded,
"But Herr Daumer, this is a word that I have heard before, and it is a bad word."
I mean, wow. So amazing. Like, if I hear someone curse in a language that I've never heard before, I'm going to know that it's a bad word, because they'll be like, just trying to make up a word.
Verdunk!
Or whatever. And you'd be like,
verdunk, yes. A well-known swear word.
Because you say swear words in a certain way. Like, beep, beep, beak. Which is just going to sound like a bunch of beeps to you, but you know what I mean. By the way, this Baumler is not to be confused with Kaspar's former Latin tutor, Daumer, despite the similarity in their names. Their identities had frequently been mixed up in research papers, hence my clarification. I could go on for quite a while. A genuinely spooky number of independent sources have mentioned Kaspar's apparent Hungarian skills throughout the years, be it a sideline remark in a medical report by Dr. Osterhausen or a second-hand account by Konrad Krug, which was referenced in Julius Maer's 1872 collection, Authentic Testimonies Regarding Kaspar Hauser, or another very important mention in the book, Oh, for fuck's sake, Dennis, we get it, please continue with the story, written by attention span researcher and retention rate enthusiast Simon. Earl Stanhope, a well-read man of widespread interests, had been thoroughly aware of Kaspar's theorized roots in the lands of horses and vineyards. To him, the idea served as a Pandora's box of brand new narratives beckoning to be investigated. Though he held firm in his belief that Kaspar's words shimmered with nothing but honesty, he was indeed very skeptical of the more popular interpretation revolving around Baden's line of succession. To his reasoning, the trail leading eastward seemed more promising. But was it? Well, most certainly not. Following the Ottoman advances in the late 15th and 16th centuries, many communities were compelled to abandon their homes, seeking refuge in the more stable regions of the northwest. Hungary, overrun by Suleiman the Magnificent in 1520, witnessed a significant exodus, predominantly to Poland, but also to territories that would later become Bavaria. Although some families eventually returned, others, like the ancestors of Bieberbach, as it would seem, opted to settle permanently. As a result, by the 1830s, Bavaria had a notable presence of those with Hungarian roots, providing ample opportunity to passively pick up a smattering of the language. Thus, knowing a handful of words meant absolutely nothing. With a bar this low, I'm the lost prince of 50 nations. Yet, he could have also just picked up a book. Like, I'm sure they had books about... the dude earlier had one book in the Hungarian language. He's probably got like a dictionary with like pronunciation guides in it and stuff. It's not like he learned a lot of words. He learned how to count to 3 and say mum and dad. My 2-year-old can count to 3 and say mum and dad. My 2-year-old can count to 10 and say mum and dad, and he's 2. Unswayed by this obvious argument, Stanhope, much like Binder, Feuerbach, and Daumer, became ensnared in a web of his own outlandish theories. As a worthy successor to Nuremberg's leading fools, he would even pursue some of those leads, but in a manner befitting a British nobleman. He paid someone else to do it. Yes. Daddy's taking a dig at me right there. All I do is read these. I do no original research. I'm not, no pretense here. Like, I like reading. That's what I do. I like reading other people's words, not writing my own. God forbid. This someone was Joseph Hickel, a former police official turned private detective. Whenever Kaspar mentioned anything related to Hungary, be it the familiarity with a certain place, event, or person, Hickel was immediately dispatched to investigate on site, making him travel back and forth at least twice during 1831 alone. It must have been quite convenient. Could you imagine a British dude having someone from Germany traverse the globe on his behalf, painstakingly gathering and compiling hard-to-acquire information regarding a weird mystery, only so that he can take most of the credit without ever leaving the comfort of his chair?
Dennis, no!
Anyway, Gottlieb von Tucher, a conservative academic with a no-nonsense attitude. I mean, steady on. I get most of the credit, but it's like, I make everyone knows these are not my words and not my research. Anyway, Gottlieb von Tucher, a conservative academic with a no-nonsense attitude, had never been particularly fond of Stanhope's childish theories or his flamboyant character in general. While their professional alliance somehow weathered private tensions, this partnership had certainly been a burden to both, a forced ceasefire rather than a desired coexistence. Unsurprisingly, Stanhope's constant visits to Kaspar gave rise to further conflicts, with Tucher accusing the Earl of spoiling his foster son too much, slowly turning him into a pompous snob, whereas Stanhope was quick to volley that argument straight back to the sender, pointing out the irony of Tucher himself being the pinnacle of self-importance. This constant tug-of-war quickly rubbed off on Kaspar's mood. While his life remained free of any materialistic needs, he gradually grew aware of being a parasite. Oh really? You did just gradually grow aware of this, did you? You are a parasite! That's literally all you do! That's all you've done! It's like, am I mooching off these rich people? Pass me another baguette! The lavish meals, once a dream come true, had slowly morphed into a daily ordeal. Even though he was served with the finest silverware and most exquisite delicacies, Kaspar often felt an invisible wall between him and the other family members, as if their conversations were drenched in a coded language expertly tailored to exclude him. Yes, I'm not surprised, because you're a random outsider who's living in their house. Casual glances exchanged between Gottlieb and his biological children revealed a shared understanding and unspoken agreement of Kaspar's lower status. Well, yes, Kaspar, that's because you are of a lower status. That's what's going on here, Kaspar. I'm sorry to break it to you. You're very lucky, in many ways. Like, not that you were kept in a box or whatever, even if that was real. But it's like, you are living a life that most other people are only able to dream of. Stop being such a douche about it. While Stanhope travelled the world and the ballroom lay in silence, Kaspar would often meander through the lonely vastness of the mansion, nostalgically recalling the connection he had once cherished with Daumer. He's like, oh no. This whole mansion, it's so empty. So many tea rooms. I don't even know what to do with them. No one else is here. Boo-hoo! Cry me a river, Kaspar. The irony was not lost on him. Surrounded by riches, he was poorer in belonging. The wealth had generously accommodated him, yet it was the warmth and acceptance of a family that remained a distant luxury. I mean, yeah, but you could have just gone and lived with, like, someone, like, a less noble or, like, wealthy family if you want to feel more on the level with them, couldn't you, Kaspar? Couldn't you? He confided in Stanhope about his emotions, of course, both face-to-face and through letters, describing his inner landscape as a desolate wasteland paved in gold. Stanhope, though only jokingly at first, replied by offering to overtake the guardianship, as he could provide not only the monetary means, but also an emotional bond. While this idea initially served more as a mental coping mechanism rather than a plan to be executed, it strangely lingered between them, as if each awaited the other's nudge to genuinely pursue it. Later that year, as if guided by the subdued hues of the impending winter, their shared fantasy would indeed become a reality, and it took Stanhope little effort to make Gottlieb von Tucher concur. On December 2nd, 1831, Earl Stanhope stepped forward as the fourth and last guardian of Kaspar Hauser. He's 17 or 18 by now, whatever. Does he really need a guardian? He's an adult man. On a related note, the Tuchers are still growing strong today, with several descendants residing at the Tucher mansion. Though their political influence has dwindled quite a bit ever since Germany gave democracy a shot, the name continues to be held in high esteem by many locals. I visited the estate, of course, trying to capture some exterior photographs without invading anyone's privacy. Yet unexpectedly, as I was looking for a good angle, an elderly gentleman emerged from the main entrance, his eyes locked onto mine, asking if I was interested in the mansion's history. I nodded reluctantly, halfway expecting him to call the police for trespassing, but to my surprise, he instead pointed to the door behind him with a smile on his face, inviting me to take a peek inside. What a legend! That's awesome!
Honey, you've got a big storm coming.
I couldn't believe my luck at first, not entirely sure if he was being sarcastic, yet when he emphasized his offer with a friendly gesture, I seized the opportunity and quickly made my way through the door, whilst showering this apparent Tucher air with gratitude. He led me through a short hallway, straight to a wooden desk, where he would suddenly stop in his tracks, asking me for money. What the dude? You're rich, you live in a mansion. It's like, yes, I'm going to need some money, please. This demand came out of nowhere and it had me very, very confused, made all the more puzzling by his overly friendly tone. Somewhat offended, I replied in a slightly louder tone, asking if this is some sort of sick joke. Bro, is this a sick joke? And he's like, no, I'm sorry. I just thought this was a tour. You wanted a tour of my time. The man's face instantly shifted into a mirror of my own irritation. Clearly aggravated, he informed me of a possible social discount in case the standard fee was beyond my means. What are you doing? What is going on? It took me another second or two until I understood my mistake. This guy was not a Tucher, he was simply working there. They had turned some parts of the place into a museum. Oh no! I mean, this isn't your fault, Dennis, but you did have your own you've both had little cringe moments here. Although it should be clear, it's more cringe on him, because it should be clear it's a museum. So, whilst painfully dying on the inside, unable to explain or salvage the situation, I simply obliged the new discounted amount and without thinking told the cashier to keep the change, bringing the total back to the standard fee. Oh my god, if this happened to me, I'd never write it in a script. I'd be like, no, nothing happened. I took a photo and then I left. I did not have a cringe moment inside the mansion. Anyway, where was I? Oh, yes. As I mentioned, the Tucher Mansion has a myriad of captivating tales intertwined with its history, of which Kaspar Hauser is only one. Still, I somehow expected them to highlight their link to the case with a certain pride, given the story's popularity both in the region and abroad. Yet, this assumption fell flat. The exhibition made not a single mention of Kaspar. Evidence of an ongoing indifference towards their former patronage? Perhaps, or maybe I just missed a room. To be fair, I was sloshed to the gills that day because, as a reminder, I'd been travelling across Bavaria for nearly a week at that point. Either way, I was eager to fuck off as quickly as possible following the incident, as you can imagine. And so was Kaspar Hauser in 1891. Bavaria is famous for its beer. If our international listeners are not getting the reference. True to this time-honoured... Although people know that, right? Bavaria's fate, isn't it? Bavaria is where Oktoberfest happens, right? Which I think, funnily enough, actually happens in September or November. It's not quite in October. True to this time-honoured structure of a classical drama, the forthcoming chapter of his life, his last one, I should note, it will conclude in a tragedy, a blood-soaked finale where all the unresolved threads converge one final time. By the end of 1833, not one, but two of our main characters will be gone, with both deaths shrouded in questions, of which I can only answer some. I hope you recall all the details scattered across this episode, as we will need every single one of them in just a moment. Chapter 9. 3 strokes and you're out. Earl Philip Stanhope was a man of many contradictions, as if he had been repeatedly sabotaged by an evil twin, jeopardizing every positive deal with an equally messed up one. Goodness, couldn't he just pick a stereotype and stick with it like a normal person? Who needs more than 2 or 3 traits anyway? Researching his life and character truly tied my brain in knots, and I still did not find any suitable cliché that we could assign to him. For instance, he was a devoted and rather strict Christian, as evidenced by several prayer books that he'd authored, but paradoxically, he was also a fervent supporter of the secularist movement, campaigning vigorously against the political influence of popes and churches. I don't think those things are contradictory, are they? Like, you can certainly be religious and not want... I'm neither. I don't think religion should be a part of the state, and I'm not religious. But I think there are people who are religious who are like, no, I don't think that should really be involved in politics, because there's more than one religion, and I respect those other religions in the hope that they respect my religion. And therefore, no, one religion should be in politics. That doesn't seem contradictory to me. Whilst proud of his noble lineage and affiliated with the Conservative Tories, Stanhope still served as a driving force for parliamentary reforms, seeking fair representation across all social strata. I like this dude. That seems, again, I don't think that's contradictory. I think that you can be from one group, let's say you're rich and you want to vote like Tory or Conservative or whatever, and then you're also like, yeah, but I also think that other people should be able to vote, and whether they have the means or not. And I think that's fair. Would I rather my party be in power? Yes, sure. But I also understand if it's not. It just seems like this just seems big brain to me. While he displayed cartoonish levels of British patriotism, he held a deep respect and fascination for foreign cultures, never considering his own nation inherently superior. It's like, I mean, I don't have cartoonish levels of British patriotism, but I'm definitely British, but I also am fascinated by foreign cultures. This guy seems cool. Other than the fact that he was grooming that. I just forgot about that. So that wasn't super cool, but let's see where this goes, shall we?
Righto.
He even played a role in advancing the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833. Nonetheless, his political views still encompass colonial fantasies imbued with quite radical free market principles, a mix of ideologies sometimes called economic slavery in today's discourse. Oh my god, I've never heard of that. Both contemporary peers and historians have highlighted Stanhope's eclectic passions and unique fervour, but also his ability to flip-flop on opinions faster than a pancake on a griddle. I'm very much confused, please send help. I like this. I think this is a good thing. To describe changing your opinion as flip-flopping on something, it's good to flip-flop sometimes. If you've got an opinion and you're presented with new facts, or you just think about it a little bit longer, it's okay to be like, no, I changed my mind. And people will be like,
well, Aston, you're not standing by your convictions.
And it's like, my convictions changed because I thought about it more. I read about it more. I grew up a little bit. I have different opinions to what I had 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And I hope that I have different opinions in 5 or 10 years. Because things change. Society evolves. Minds evolve. People evolve. This is cool. I like it. In the labyrinth of Stanhope's inscrutable motives, his relationship with Kaspar Hauser had been equally fraught with twists and turns. To this day, I remain uncertain whether it was genuine kindness that had truly guided his decision to take the reins in Kaspar's odyssey, or ulterior motives. Gottlieb von Tucher, among many others, held just as little trust in Stanhope's grandiose gestures and stories. Questions loomed large not only regarding his patronage, but also his self-centered claims in general. Was he truly friends with William Pitt, the sitting British Prime Minister? Did his wealth really match the opulence of his attire? Or was this just the dazzling costume of a snake oil salesman from afar? And the promise of taking Kaspar to his manor in Kent, that's where I'm from. Was he referring to a tangible brick-and-mortar edifice or a castle built in the clouds of imagination? Well, there are plenty of manors in Kent. There's not like a lack of manors. He probably had... why are we doubting this dude so much? Some Hauser documentaries and non-scientific retellings have depicted Stanhope as an heir of an impoverished and low-ranking squire, insinuating he had been all hat and no cattle, an Instagram influencer ahead of his time, artificially overstating his true social standing for lifestyle purposes. While I do see the poetic beauty in the two alleged fraudsters falling for each other's lies, my own research arrived at a different conclusion. The Earl was, in fact, not flashing fool's gold. His primary business involved large-scale foreign exchange trading, complemented by some alleged sideline money laundering, AA. You don't do that if you're not making a lot of money. No one's money laundering small amounts of money because otherwise it'd be just, why didn't you just do a non-criminal job? In an era characterized by fragmented microeconomies, both endeavors flourished financially, though his wealth still paled in comparison to the Tuchers by a significant margin. Well, yeah, because they've been building up their wealth for centuries. What would you expect? Stanhope was also successful at collecting benefactors and endorsements akin to rare Pokemon cards, making him powerful via both official titles and tactical nudge-nudge wink-wink networking. The roots of his connections extended far and deep, and yes, he was not only friends with the Prime Minister, they were second cousins. This dude's legit. I think he's legit. Therefore, in my assessment, Stanhope's promise of taking Kaspar to the Isles of Mist and food had not been a whimsical fancy born of romanticized self-deception. No, it had been a genuine plan for both of them, meant to become a reality. Unfortunately, plans rarely play out the way they're intended. For example, hey Simon, remember when I sold you this script as a super short interlude between two larger projects? I don't even remember, but that's because it was ages ago and it took me ages to record this. And again, I apologize, Dennis. Well, in my defense, you did give me positive feedback on that Scrooge McDuck behemoth, so the length of this episode is kind of your fault after all.
Why would you do that?
I don't mind. I'm having a great time. I'm enjoying the shit out of this, and I enjoyed the shit out of the Scrooge McDuck one, which I think was on Casual Criminalist. Check it out. It's super popular as well. Everyone liked that. Anyway, relocating to England post-haste as previously settled was not the seamless transition they'd anticipated. Their abrupt decision came as a sudden key change, disrupting the calm harmony that had just settled in. The lawyer Anselm von Feuerbach had his reservations regarding this arrangement and required a moment to process the news and unravel its judicial intricacies. Meanwhile, the royal authorities, still wary of Kaspar's unwavering claims to the Duchy of Baden and their potential diplomatic ramifications, cautiously treaded the newly stirred waters. Even Mayor Binder tried to intervene, though he lacked the authority to do so. Oh, Mayor Binder. That's a blast from the past. Blast for an hour and a half ago. Given the plethora of administrative hurdles and all-around objections, Stanhope was ultimately forced to leave Kaspar behind for the time being. He returned to Kent in early 1831, but without the company of his cherished fosterling, who once again fell victim to an age-old tradition instead. Feuerbach temporarily entrusted Kaspar to the care of a random private scholar. Third time's the charm, right? Well, wrong, and no, the wrongest kind of wrong. You see, Kaspar was relocated to Ansbach, a charming town located west of Nuremberg, where he had been welcomed into the home of Johann Georg Meyer. But welcomed might be a misleading choice of words, as Meyer's pedagogic approach was basically Bieberbach all over again, but on steroids. He shared Bieberbach's skepticism when it came to Kaspar's claims, quickly addressing his seemingly vain and dishonest characteristics with strict, no-nonsense household rules. The concept of humor was foreign to Meyer, and so was the idea of personal freedom. He's an adult by this point. What is going on? Gone were the days of boisterous bashes. In his pursuit of an even higher summit, Kaspar had placed his foot confidently on the next rung of life's ladder. But the step betrayed him, crumbling underfoot and sending him spiraling downwards, straight into the arms of the strictest caregiver imaginable. What a dramatic irony. At least, there was one bit of good news. Thanks to Feuerbach's recommendation, he was able to continue his duties as a copyist at Ansbach's courthouse. History pages on Meyer are more shadow than ink, yet thanks to his regular correspondence with Feuerbach and Stanhope, we gain at least a handful of glimpses into their complicated relationship. There were two aspects that I found particularly interesting. First, Meyer's prose is nearly poetic in its elegance, and I'm not being sarcastic. German is an inherently ugly language. I didn't say that. Dennis said that, and he's German.
Bitte entschuldigen Sie meine kurze Unaufmerksamkeit. Ich musste kurz A Beautiful Mind, Genie und Wahnsinn. Babel. Wow, I can't believe I speak perfect German.
Yet his words radiate an unexpected beauty nonetheless. Just got to comment here. I just want to say it. Dennis's English, even though it's not his first language, is better than mine. Like, I read this and it's like, these are words I don't even know. Or like, I mean, I know, but I'd never use because... like, there's a big difference between reading a word and knowing what it is, and then actually using that word yourself. I'm genuinely impressed, but more importantly, every comment about his live-in student was thoroughly negative, a harsh and unyielding critique, insulting at best and outright cynical at worst. Take Daumer's hyperbolic praise, multiply it by -1, and you will arrive at Meyer's valuation. Frankly, it feels as if he found sadistic joy in listing Kaspar's shortcomings in the most aesthetically pleasing ways possible. Well, at least I found sadistic joy in reading it. For instance, Meyer frequently questioned his students' intellectual capabilities, predicting that Hauser will remain ill-equipped for any professions demanding any type of cognitive skills. He's too dumb. He's too dumb to have a good job. In another letter, he rhetorically asked if he should drop his endeavours of classical education altogether and teach him the art of lying instead, as Kaspar would certainly be capable of greater service to the guild of gullible benefactors than to bookbinders, clockmakers, or merchants. Stanhope replied to this remark with the 1831's formal equivalent of go f*** yourself. So, while Kaspar was temporarily stuck with a bitter drill sergeant whilst desperately waiting for his knight in shining armor to come and pick him up, we must steer our focus towards our second protagonist, namely Anselm von Feuerbach. As you might recall, Feuerbach had been working on a publication ever since he first came into contact with the curious foundling of Nuremberg, trying to bridge the genres of psychological case studies and investigate criminal reports. His work culminated in a compendium whose title could roughly be translated as Kaspar Hauser, a case study of crimes against human nature, and the importance of its publication could hardly be overstated. Originally conceived as a confidential resource exclusively for select legal professionals, his work quickly leaked into the public realm. This unintended disclosure, as per several accounts, fueled the swift circulation of unauthorized copies peddled by door-to-door salesmen well aware of the Hauser craze. This book's distribution was literally a crime, and therefore it sold by the thousands, yes! But why all the secrecy anyway? Was there some touchy intel Feuerbach needed to protect? Well, yeah, sort of. You see, since Feuerbach was a rather public person and state representative of Bavaria, openly accusing Baden's reigning rulership of both murder and high treason was, to put it mildly, a bit on the risky side of things. Lesser transgressions had indeed prompted wars in Europe's past. Take, for example, the War of the Three Henrys or the War of Spanish Succession. To be fair, the chance of Kaspar Hauser prompting a literal full-blown military escalation was obviously non-existent, yet the atmosphere had been uncomfortably charged nonetheless. Many years ago, one of my professors for political sciences ended a lecture with the words, "Diplomacy is the art of strategic silence. It is not about what you say, but about what you do not say." This quote has lived with me rent-free ever since. For this reason, Feuerbach's Baden-related assertions were cloaked in several layers of artificial ambiguity. While his lines teemed with insanely provocative insinuations, his legal acumen led him to pepper each of these risky statements with various versions of allegedly, in my personal view, not a proven fact, please don't sue me. Yet his true stance was not that hard to discern amidst the mitigations. For example, he repeatedly pointed out that his claims would not carry any decisive weight before any judge, which is admittedly an elegant way to sidestep possible repercussions. His work strangely reminded me of Galileo Galilei's Dialogo, in which he described a heliocentric universe in the form of dialogue and then added a third character whose sole purpose was to emphasize the theoretical nature of their thought experiments, which was obviously fictional and easily disproven by the Bible. But the Pope still came after him big time. Yeah, because it's like, you're just like, allegedly. Allegedly. And it's like, you're legally covered, I imagine. But it's also like, people know what's up. The Pope's still coming for you.
Pope! Pope! It's a time to get up and put on your hat. It's a stupid hat.
Yet Feuerbach's fate, according to one possible interpretation, turned out to be far more tragic. Whereas Galileo was put under a relatively comfortable all-inclusive house arrest for his unspeakable crimes against God, Feuerbach paid the ultimate price. Shortly after the unintended publication of his comprehensive research into Kaspar Hauser's possible origin, Feuerbach's health took a rapid and alarming downturn. He's been poisoned! In a preserved letter to his son, he described bouts of severe dizziness and frequently caused him to lose consciousness altogether. He also spoke of a perpetual confusion and a marked deterioration in his memory, which impeded his daily activities and halted his investigations. These symptoms rapidly intensified, culminating in a series of severe strokes. While he remarkably returned from oblivion's edge twice, the third stroke sadly proved beyond his strength. In early 1833, Anselm von Feuerbach, the pioneer of modern law, had succumbed to a sudden illness that no one could quite identify. That is way suspicious. He has definitely been poisoned by this Baden family, in my opinion. This was back in the day. They did it, in my opinion. I mean, it is my opinion. I'm not trying to cover myself. That's what I think. A mere coincidence? Well, in case Feuerbach's condition somehow reminded you of atropine poisoning, then you're absolutely correct, and also a bit suspicious. Commonly derived from nightshade or belladonna plants, ingestion of this toxic substance can lead to symptoms similar to those experienced by Feuerbach. By the 1830s, nightshade had gained notoriety as a popular weapon for murder throughout Europe, as it was both undetectable and easy to come by. According to criminological estimations, it had been the #1 poison of the era, rivaled only by arsenic. Remember the 6 royal heirs of Baden who had died just in time to divert the line of succession? Would you be surprised to learn that atropine had been suspected in 2 of those deaths? Absolutely not surprised at all. In fact, it seems very fitting with the narrative that I think has happened. According to a pamphlet published by Ansbach's Office for Culture and Tourism in December 2022, the unnatural death of Feuerbach seems to be a near-proven fact, or to quote directly, we must assume he had been poisoned. While it might not state it with such a degree of certainty, the notion has indeed been approached by historians and medical professionals alike, concluding that foul play cannot be ruled out. At the same time, there is no way to verify at ease that either, as the substance dissolves within a couple of months, leaving no trace behind. Even an exhumation would not provide any additional clarity. Feuerbach's unexpected death can be interpreted in 3 possible ways, each consistent with the known facts. Theory A. If Kaspar Hauser was truly the lost Prince of Baden, then Feuerbach's research posed a significant threat to the legitimacy of Baden's current rulers. When his findings leaked to the public, those in power might have felt compelled to silence him quickly, especially given his influential position as a prominent lawyer. Although Feuerbach held no jurisdiction outside of Bavaria, he was still a force to be reckoned with. Theory B. Conversely, even if Kaspar Hauser had not been a lost prince, Feuerbach's revelations still threatened international relationships. He was a walking liability in his own right, arguably even more so than Hauser. By this logic, it could have been Bavaria's leadership and not Baden's that had Feuerbach sent to the eternal after-party. Remember, King Ludwig went out of his way to keep Kaspar's mouth under control, but controlling a well-known man would have proved more difficult, so murder might have been the only available option. Theory C. It's entirely feasible that Feuerbach died from natural causes. Strokes can occur without warning, and the timing of his death, while suspicious, could be purely coincidental. Yeah, but he's like, I'm feeling a bit dizzy. Then he has a stroke and then he dies. It's poisoning, and I think it's theory A. Well, fine. But which one is it? Well, we'll get back to that in a second. Everything in this episode is interconnected, which is why we need to gather a few more puzzle pieces before we can set about putting them together. The boy who livn't. When Kaspar learned about Feuerbach's potentially malicious death, the grim revelation draped him in a cold shroud of melancholy, fueled by a mix of anger and despair. The depth of his grief was so palpable that even Mayer, typically ever sarcastic, toned down his biting remarks for a while, seemingly touched by Kaspar's genuine sadness. Understandably so. After all, Feuerbach seemed to have been the only reliable constant in Kaspar's life, the only person whose honourable intentions truly remained beyond any reasonable doubt. And now he was gone. And the orphan of Nuremberg was once again just that, an abandoned orphan with no real sense of belonging. But there was still hope. Stanhope, to be precise, right? Well, when it rains, it pours, doesn't it? As you may remember, Stanhope had hired a private detective of sort, a certain Joseph Hickel, tasked to confirm Kaspar's tale about Hungary through on-the-ground sleuthing, a Hail Mary project that had spanned over a year. Not only would Hickel travel back and forth numerous times, but he also followed up with some other leads unrelated to Hungary in an attempt to unblur the overall picture. Though this might come as a shock to you, Hickel's explorations always had him return empty-handed. Nay, even worse, he would exclusively dig up evidence directly contradicting whatever Kaspar had previously claimed with the utmost conviction. Yeah, it's not a surprise, because he's a con man, right?
Yep.
A pattern emerged. Though Kaspar was usually quick to explain away any emerging discrepancies, he ultimately found himself trapped in the middle of an intricate web compiled of lies and even more lies, which Hickel, in turn, dismantled one by one. Before long, Stanhope could not turn a blind eye anymore. The seed of doubt had nestled in his mind, and with every new contradiction, its roots grew deeper. By the time of Feuerbach's death, Stanhope's perspective had shifted entirely. In consequence, the Earl slowly distanced himself from his protégé and abandoned any plans of taking him to England until eventually, by early 1833, he even joined forces with those attempting to obliterate Kaspar's reputation. Stanhope would later compile his revised stance into a tell-all, kicking off with the not-so-subtle preamble, "I believe it is my duty to publicly confess that I have been deceived." Though his publication largely rehashed insights others had pointed out way before him, his words were remarkably objective, scientific even, as well as surprisingly transparent. The historian Walter Schriebmüller commented on it like this. On the whole, the materials give the impression of a careful author, willing to ascertain nothing but the truth. Recognizing his own fallibility, the new enlightened Stanhope had not been driven by revenge or anger. He simply wanted to rectify his own misjudgments in a somewhat apologetic way. Again, Stanhope, bit of a legend, to be honest. But being a man of contradictions, it must be noted that for some odd reason, Stanhope still willingly remained Kaspar's guardian on paper. Okay, Stanhope, you unusual man, you. In any case, it could have been much worse for Kaspar, right? I mean, at least he had not been brutally stabbed to death. So, Kaspar was then brutally stabbed to death in a public park. Oh, well, that happened quickly. The attack occurred on the 14th of December, 1833, and frankly, the circumstances could not have been any more confusing. It is arguably a myth in itself, a crime riddled with clues, both self-evident and absurd, as if the sequence of events had been ripped straight out of the pages of a Victorian-era crime novel, deliberately crafted to evoke tension for sharp-minded audiences. Actually, I might as well write it like a Victorian-era crime novel, as there is no better way of doing it justice. I'll be back in a minute. I'll get a nice cup of tea and a pipe. Okay. The Curious Case of the Purple Purse. In the heart of Ansbach, where eerie gas lamps spread a phantasmal glow over the fog-laden winter air, stood the majestic edifice of the regional courthouse. Shadows from the past loomed over its Gothic arches, whispering tales of mysteries unsolved and justice unmet. Cold rain incessantly battered against the facades, forming rivulets tainted with the grime of the city, swirling into the murky drains as if the heavens sought to wash away the sins that lurked in the building's every nook and cranny. Its hallowed halls were replete with grim tales and misfortunes of every variety. Yet the most peculiar enigma belonged to a diligent court assistant, a simple copyist of childlike stature, dedicating countless hours to transcribing legal documents in stoic silence. The name was Kaspar Hauser, his pen strokes meticulous, and his demeanor ever-focused. I'm enjoying reading this like a novel. Kaspar was not merely a man of habits, but a slave to them. Dawn after dawn, with an almost ritualistic precision, he'd step out from his teacher's domicile, clasping his leather-bound briefcase. He'd tread the path to his workplace, day in, day out, in a monotonous stride, belying his spectacular and most intriguing past. Yet one mist-enveloped morn, the sanctity of routine was shattered. While navigating the serpentine streets, a mysterious figure materialized from the milky veils, blocking Kaspar's usual path. His clothes, simple and worn out, spoke of a life of civility. "Good sir," began the man, against rhythmic clops of horse-drawn carriages all around, "I'm in the employ of the Royal Gardener, custodian of the verdant expanses that surround the Margrave's palace." Raising an eyebrow, both intrigued and wary, Kaspar responded, "And pray tell, what business does the Royal Gardener have with a humble copyist?" "Sir requests the honour of a private audience," replied the stranger, his face half concealed by the brim of a tattered hat, and his voice filled with a hushed urgency. "A private audience with you at the ancient well, a sentinel of stone and moss within the palace gardens. You cannot miss it. My master has a revelation most dire to share." Though assailed by a sense of suspicion, Kaspar accepted this odd invitation with a subtle nod and went his way. Hours later, after the courthouse's grand clock had tolled the end of his daily duties, Kaspar found himself by the fabled well just as agreed. Surrounded by the lonely call of unseen winter birds and an icy breeze, he awaited the groundskeeper's arrival calmly, wondering what revelation he was about to receive. Yet despite his timely appearance, the Royal Gardener was nowhere in sight. Time seemed to stretch, and with each passing moment, unease gripped Kaspar's heart a little tighter. With his patience waning and his coldness creeping through the folds of his coat, Kaspar began to doubt the purpose of his venture. Just as he was about to turn on his heel and abandon this fool's errand, a rustling sound caught his attention. His eyes darted toward the source. From the edge of his vision, a faint silhouette emerged, slowly solidifying as it moved closer. It was a slow, deliberate approach, almost taunting Kaspar with its unhurriedness. Each step seemed to elongate the expense, and the very air grew thick with anticipation. The dim light revealed little, yet it was clearly neither the gardener's aid nor a guise befitting any royal servant. As the figure stepped into the patch where the fading twilight broke through, a bushy beard became visible, and the surprising hue of a petite purple reticule in his grasp caught Kaspar's eye. "Kaspar Hauser," the man intoned, his barking voice drenched with foreboding. "This bag is a present for you. It contains a message of utmost importance." Kaspar, heartbeat loud in his ears, nodded. His eyes never left the figure, trying to discern more details, seeking some hint or clue. As he extended his hand to claim the mysterious object, the agonizingly slow moment was shattered. Without warning, the flash of cold steel suddenly gleamed in the dim light, and pain, sharp and immediate, erupted from Kaspar's side. Only when he looked down to see the knife embedded deep within his guts did the reality of the situation truly hit. As darkness encroached on his vision, the assailant's footsteps retreated, fading fast. Kaspar's anguished cries were desperate, raw, and filled with a kind of pain that resonates in the very soul of any who hears it. The echo lingered in the air, carried by the chilling winds through the maze-like hedges and ancient statues of the garden. But alas, there was none to bear witness to this dire scene. No soul ventured forth in aid, no comforting voice to allay his fears. Kaspar's desperate pleas were but faint whispers, lost in the winter gusts. With a Herculean effort, driven by raw instincts of survival, Kaspar dragged himself upright. Each step was laborious, a war waged against the pain that threatened to consume him. It took what seemed like an eternity, every footfall a testament to Kaspar's determination, but finally, the familiar silhouette of Mayor's residence rose before him. As he crossed the threshold, the warm interior greeted him, the comforting scent of aged wood and burning hearth. Mayor, engrossed in some scholarly pursuit, looked up, eyes widening in shock upon seeing his pupil. The crimson stain on Kaspar's clothes told a harrowing tale. The wound seeping through the fabric painted a macabre contrast against Kaspar's pale face. Maya rushed to his side, arms outstretched, catching the faltering Kaspar. "Good heavens, Kaspar, what happened?" Maya's voice quivered with anxiety. Kaspar, though faint, shook his head vehemently at Maya's insistence on seeking the immediate aid of physicians. "Sir," he rasped, "the garden. I must show you." Each word was an effort, but the fire in his eyes conveyed an urgency that could not be denied, despite Kaspar seemingly closer to death than to life. Understanding the gravity of the request, Maya hastily grabbed a clean tissue and pressed it against the wound, attempting to staunch the unrelenting flow. With an arm firmly around Kaspar's waist, he aided his protege in retracing the steps to the palace garden. Yet the fates seemed to have decreed otherwise. The ardor that had initially fueled Kaspar's steps began to wane as the streets unwound before him a second time. His strength ebbed, his steps faltered, and his breathing grew more ragged. By the time the ornate gates of the palace garden once again loomed ahead, Kaspar's spirit, though indomitable, could no longer combat the debilitating physical strain. His body gave way, and he crumpled to the ground, the chilling grasp of unconsciousness taking hold. Maya, stricken with panic, knew that he had but one recourse. Lifting the feeble form of his pupil, he hailed a passing carriage, its wheels clattering urgently on the cobblestones, making haste to the nearest hospital. During the subsequent days, in a room wafting with the scent of medicinal herbs and iodine, Kaspar Hauser lay ensconced in white linens, his once vital form weakened by the grievous wound inflicted upon him. The finest physicians of the town were summoned post-haste to attend to the enigmatic court assistant, and in due course his condition indeed did stabilize. The following dawn broke with numerous visitors, among them fellow court associates, and naturally a congregation of constables who had spent the night combing the crime scene. They had discovered the mysterious bag, speckled with soil and dew near the well, even before Kaspar had a chance to mention it. With stern expressions, the investigators had carefully untied the reticule, but only a single solitary item lay within, a piece of parchment, square in shape and folded artistically, its four corners meeting at the center as if guarding its content with a secretive embrace. The head constable cautiously unfolded the note, unveiling its mysterious contents to the awaited assembly. However, as they strained their eyes to read, it became evident that this was no ordinary message. The symbols inscribed upon it were closer to regular German letters, but not quite. The room filled with puzzled murmurs as each officer tried to decipher the perplexing language in vain. The mystery persisted until one sharp-witted constable, struck by a sudden insight, held his pocket mirror to the paper. On its reversed surface, the enigmatic message was finally revealed in clarity. and the text read as such. Hauser will be able to tell you exactly what I look like and where I come from. To save the Hauser the trouble, I will tell you myself where I come from. I come from the Bavarian border near the river. I will even tell you my name. M-L-O. Though initially spirited and showing signs of improvement, Kaspar's condition took a turn for the worst on the third day. Fevered murmurs, delirious ramblings, and cold sweats consumed him, rendering him unrecognizable in his anguish. As dusk approached on December 17th, 1833, a somber stillness enveloped the chamber of Kaspar Hauser's deathbed, the atmosphere thick with the heavy weight of impending doom. The shadows of the candle flames danced upon the walls, casting eerie spectres that seemed to sway in morbid anticipation, and as the sun's last light had receded below the horizon, the horrible truth could no longer be denied. For Kaspar Hauser, dawn would never break anew. In his last fleeting moment of clarity, Kaspar whispered, "Why should I have anger or hatred towards anyone? The people have not done anything bad to me." These profound words, filled with resilience and grace, marked his last utterance. As the night deepened, his battle ended. Just after 10 p.m., the foundling of Nuremberg was pronounced dead. 3 days later, the city of Augsburg witnessed an unparalleled assembly of mourners from near and far. News of Kaspar's death deeply resonated with many, drawing crowds to pay their respects. On December 20th, 1833, with the mournful toll of the Ansbach Cathedral bell in the background, Kaspar Hauser was interned in the city cemetery. The gathered masses stood solemn in tribute. His body was lowered into its final resting place below a tombstone that read, "Here lies Kaspar Hauser, enigma of his time, unknown origin, mysterious death." In 1833. That was like a novel, Dennis. I didn't have any comments. I was just reading it like a novel. Oh, that was fun. That was a really nice way of handling that. I'm very pleased. Random Game of Thrones pun or something. Now, in a traditional episode of Decoding the Unknown, this is the part where we would recap key takeaways, provide some clarifications, and then stitch everything together, constructing a somewhat convincing verdict, which usually goes along the lines of, yes, cool, but seriously, though, this is obviously nonsense, thank you for watching. And to be fair, defaulting to skepticism surely holds water when it comes to debunking most age-old conspiracies. However, this episode works differently in a frustrating way, as such an easy escape route simply does not exist. Dismissing one theory immediately unravels another one, leading us down an infinite rabbit hole of even wilder narratives. There is only one more thing annoying than bullshit, and that's recursive bullshit. I mean, what even is the question we're trying to answer here? Well, who had murdered Kaspar Hauser, of course, and why? But also, was he truly the Lost Prince of Baden? And if he was, why had his life been spared to begin with? Had he hidden within Castle Bugen throughout his early childhood? Had he been hidden in Castle Bugen throughout his early childhood? Heck, was there even a raw conspiracy at all? Did Feuerbach meet his end because he came too close to the truth? And what about the failed assassination at Daumer's abode? Even if we decide to throw out every single one of these angles, one teeny tiny question remains. Who the was Kaspar Hauser then? And the answer might surprise you. Yeah, I do think he's a con man, and I do think this was all a setup. I think he's just a con man, and that's why he learned so quickly, and that's why you remember the letters at the beginning with the fresh ink all those hours ago. I think this was all just a big con. It's a mess, but not to worry. I've sacrificed my sanity to put things back in order, to get some factual footing before venturing forth to the more speculative realms. So let us begin with Baden's alleged bloodline bamboozle. Without access to Baden's documents and institutions, Feuerbach was significantly limited in resources when penning his theories roughly 2 centuries ago. His assertions largely rested on Kaspar's words and behavior, complemented by the notes of Binder and Daumer, which are clearly not the most reliable sources that one could imagine. As we have established before, their experiments on Kaspar were fundamentally flawed, their observations tainted by esoteric spiritualism and the romantic mindset of that era. In a way, the three men formed a stable triangle of delusion, an echo chamber of self-deception, thus fortifying each other's conviction to the point of no return. These kinds of things have happened before. A man witnesses a dude walk on water, another tells of water turning to wine, and proof everyone is stuck in a self-sustaining belief system for the next couple of millennia. Same story, different scale. Yes, indeed. Yet times have shifted since then. The Grand Duchy was eventually absorbed into the fabric of modern-day Germany, a transition that also marked the disclosure of countless documents formerly classified. Looking at it from today's perspective, with unrestricted access to the archives and Simon's unlimited budget for travel expenses, we can pick up the trail right where it went cold for Feuerbach. So, had he truly stumbled upon a forbidden truth? Is the coffin the supposed resting place of Baden's bygone prince actually empty? Well, it is with great pleasure to announce that Feuerbach's empty coffin theory is highly doubtful, to the extent that we may even consider it disproven. Many credible sources have surfaced since then, including royal autopsy reports and burial protocols, as well as multiple private letters written by those who, unlike Stephanie Bonaparte, had attended the funeral rites. Beyond any reasonable doubt, a baby's body had been buried that day in 1812. The evidence is overwhelming and virtually irrefutable, which is why I decided against breaking into the royal crypt at the last minute. If anyone could use a brand new crowbar, send me an offer. But the empty coffin theory was only one of two narratives, and the less popular one at that. You see, even if there had been a corpse, how can we be sure those remains truly belonged to the newborn Prince of Baden? Yeah, it's not going to be hard for them. This is the past. Babies were dying all the time. It's not going to be hard for them to find another body to put in there. According to the bait and switch theory, this detail warrants closer inspection, as it provides a potential rationale for several intricacies that are difficult to explain otherwise. The bait and switch theory broadly mirrors Feuerbach's ideas, yet deviates in some important specifics. In essence, the Archduke's sixth heir stood in the way of a royal conspiracy and needed to vanish. Though the plotters' original plan might have been to simply commit yet another murder, they ultimately decided to spare the newborn and hide them away at Castle Bugen. So far, so good. But they still needed to somehow fake his death in some believable way, which is hard, nay, near impossible without presenting a dead body, isn't it? Yeah, just so go find a dead body. You're rich and powerful. It's not going to be that hard. To rectify this glaring issue, they went for the most obvious strategy, somehow acquiring the corpse of another newborn baby, exactly one that had legitimately died from a respiratory illness, of which there were plenty in the time of pre-antibiotics. Exactly. This way, they could not only fool the royal coroner, but also stage an open casket funeral, which was the norm among 19th century nobility. Only one potential pitfall: Stephanie Bonaparte. Being the mother, she might have recognized that the child laid before her was in fact not her own flesh and blood. Therefore, with some made-up excuse, she had swiftly been banned from bidding her son farewell. The narrative seems highly logical and convincing. Yeah, I like it. I mean, I still think the dude was just a con man, but it's quite convincing. But unfortunately, there's a clear distinction between being plausible and being true. So which category does it fall into? Surprisingly, barely a handful of indicators can help determine this, with each piece of evidence thoroughly circumstantial and dependent on interpretation. For example, there's an interesting trail of letters left behind by Princess Amalie of Hesse-Darmstadt, who happened to reside at the Karlsruhe Palace alongside the Hochbergs. In her earlier correspondence, she painted the newborn prince as a beacon of vitality, robust and brimming with life. Yet as pages turned, so did her descriptions, charting a slow ebb of the toddler's previous vigor. The continuous and gradual transition might indicate that she was likely seeing the same child throughout. Then again, most other sources speak of a sudden respiratory failure rather than a slow progressing ailment, which is weird. So how can we explain this discrepancy? Well, it's important to remember that Princess Amalie lacked medical training and had no offspring herself, so her observations may not have been entirely accurate. Also, it's not entirely clear if the letters even mirrored her own first-hand observations, as pointed out by Reddit user Dripping Noodle. One could interpret her writings as relaying second-hand accounts passed on to her by others who might have been involved in the conspiracy. Another often overlooked key witness to consider is the midwife, Barbara Horst, who consistently cared for the young prince from his day of birth. Given her frequent interactions with the child and her attendance at the emergency baptism conducted shortly after his demise, it stands to reason that she would have noticed any behind-the-scenes switcheroo, which apparently she did not. Yet this argument hinges on whether one concurs with my personal belief that all infants look exactly the same. They do look very similar. They don't look the same, especially to the parents. You know which kid is yours. Also, if the prince had indeed been swapped for a decoy, another intriguing question arises. Where did the substitute body come from? Luckily, Baden maintained detailed records of every birth and death in the 16th century, reflecting Germany's stereotypical fetish for administrative accuracy. These documents can now be found in the General Archive of Karlsruhe, and they're publicly accessible. If the prince had indeed been exchanged with another baby boy, there should have been a record in those vast archives. Yeah, but these people are super rich and powerful. They could just, grease someone's palm and make a document go away, surely. A file detailing a male infant of the same age as the prince, linked to the Baden royal lineage in some subtle way, who had passed away from respiratory failure and lacks a documented burial location. So, may I suggest one Johann Ernst Jakob Blochmann. Born on the 26th of December 1812, he was but 3 days the senior to an unnamed royal son. And here is where the plot thickens. His father, a certain Christoph Blochmann, had been a craftsman under the direct employ of one Caroline Louise of Hochberg. Most intriguing, but it gets even stranger. There had not been a single other mention of this Johann Ernst Jakob Blochmann anywhere in the entire body of documents and registers, an eerie omission for one so closely tied to the royal family. The newborn had essentially disappeared from the pages of history right after his first cry. But this is only half the story. You see, there is a strange little entry in a church register of Karlsruhe's diocese which notes the death of a certain Kaspar Jakob Blochmann, a perfect blend of names. Save for the death note, no record of a person bearing that name exists in any other register. So to summarize, one birth without death, one death without birth, the same person perhaps. Adding even another layer of confusion, the date of Blochmann's demise was 18th of December 1833, precisely one day after Kaspar Hauser had succumbed to his wounds in Ansbach. The meaning of this? Well, I'm not exactly sure. People much smarter than me couldn't figure it out either, but there seems to be a vague connection, and it certainly gives me a headache. Yeah, so maybe. As you might have noticed, we are indeed grasping at straws. Yeah, exactly. It's just like big maybes. It's like, okay, could have happened. No idea if it did. I think it's just Occam's razor. The simplest answer is just a con man. To definitively prove the allegations either way, one would need to conduct DNA analysis, comparing the remains of whoever had been buried to the genome of known descendants. Alas, this will likely never happen, as the crypt is pretty much the Vatican vault of Germany, which might merit a bit of suspicion itself. But should it? Let's theorize for a moment. If we were to conduct DNA tests and discover that the line of succession had indeed been fraudulently altered 2 centuries ago, would that change the status of the current lineage holders? Could the legitimate heirs, if identified, legally claim the inheritance and adjust the line of succession retroactively? The short answer's no, and the longer answer is nope. Curiosity led me to pay a lawyer for insights into this matter.
I'm the law-talking guy.
The lawyer.
Right.
As the parasites in my brain needed to know, and I have absolutely zero self-control when it comes to useless trivia knowledge. This lawyer suggested that in such a scenario, a German court might apply the equity law of the United Kingdom. This is because the issue predates the formation of modern Germany, which operates under a principle of non-retroactivity, meaning current laws cannot address events before their existence. Yes, which makes a ton of sense. To overcome this, the lawyers reasoned that a judge might look into a similar international legal system, such as the UK's. While I double-checked this assessment later, I quickly realized that his explanation is not only wrong, it's nonsensical. First of all, applying foreign laws in German courtrooms breaches like a billion law principles at once. While they're not applying the foreign law, they're just looking at... They're taking inspiration from another jurisdiction. Like, if there are no laws about something and a new legal system or a newer legal system or whatever, and it doesn't have something dealing with that, they could look at how other countries do it. It doesn't mean they have any legal standing. It just means that they could be looking at it for inspiration. Additionally, Bavaria has its very own equity law at the time, the Codex Maximilianus Bavaricus Civilis, which would be a more appropriate reference than any English substitute. The supposed fraud occurred in what is now Germany, so any legal distinction would be based on the local law of that era. Simple as that. Well, yeah, that makes sense. If they've got like local laws for dealing with this, and it's obviously been applied before, then just go with the local stuff. Why would you? It doesn't... Yeah, of course.
My goodness, what an idea. Why didn't I think of that?
50 Shades of Grey Areas. So, let us assign the Barden conspiracy a plausible in theory and carry on. Even if we had some sort of proof, we would still need to connect the dots to Kaspar Hauser somehow. Had he been a prisoner at Castle Bugen or any other basement dungeon at all for that matter? From a medical standpoint, our story is obviously riddled with more holes than SpongeBob SquarePants. I've never heard SpongeBob SquarePants described as riddled before, but I suppose he is. I'm sure Simon has highlighted this like 1,000 times throughout the episode. If Kaspar had indeed been locked in a dungeon for the first 16 years of his life, there would have been serious and irreversible health implications such as severe muscular atrophy, a drastic decrease in bone density, and a vitamin D deficiency that would have been impossible to survive. I actually haven't. And I just assumed that, pretty immediately, not immediately, but about, halfway through today's absolute beast of an episode, I was like, he's a con man. He's definitely a con man. Something's weird's going on. But I assumed that they were somehow dealing with this. Like, letting him walk around, or I don't know why his bones would be less dense. I guess from, lack of movement. And vitamin D, can't they just give him vitamin D? I guess I didn't think about that. It's the early 19th century, right? They probably didn't. I take a vitamin D supplement. When I told the story, I went for a blood test. It must be 3 years ago now. Just have a yearly medical. And they're like, wow, your vitamin D is crazy low. Do you not go outside? And I'm like, no, I don't go outside. I just work and stay inside. And they're like, here's some pills. You take one of these once per day and come back and get a checkup. And I'm like, okay. And so I take vitamin D pills now to keep me nice and healthy so I don't have to go outside. Also, Daumer's assumption that continuous darkness leads to cat-like eyesight is clearly rubbish. The adage, use it or lose it, can apply to many neural functions, including vision. Without optical input, the brain's visual pathways might degrade to the point of blindness. Yet, when Kaspar appeared in the streets of Nuremberg, he was able to walk, albeit with difficulty, and showed little to no immediate signs of severe malnutrition. Though he was a bit ruffled and shaky in his movements, he had been in genuinely good shape, all things considered. Can we therefore conclude that his claims of permanent imprisonment were grossly exaggerated, if not entirely fabricated? Yeah. I don't know what the next line's going to be, Dennis, but yes. To put it simply, yes, we absolutely can. Dennis and I, same page. But as mentioned before, this story is a hydra of sorts. For each theory slain, two more arise. How could Kaspar recall Bugen's emblem if it had not been there? And how can we explain the drawing of a horse etched onto the walls of a dungeon which matched Kaspar's description down to the smallest details? Well, you're in luck, because I think I can answer both of these questions conclusively. Yeah, it's a frame-up, right? Like, they've put that in there on purpose. And they've told him about the crest on purpose, because he's a con man. On the matter of the emblem, the answer might be surprisingly straightforward, albeit a tad underwhelming. Feuerbach, like many before him, may have been ensnared by a subtle trap of the mind, sometimes called the close enough hit bias. This is where you, someone draws something and you see something in it because you want to see it, or it's like it's close enough so you're like, this is definitely that, even though it's not. He's just drawing like a random crest. I mean, all crests kind of look the same, right? There's a shield, it's maybe divided into 4 quarters, it's got some like lions and shit on there. Like, come on, it's not, that's kind of a crest, right? To illustrate, consider this random example. Before Einstein shook the world to its core, scientists relied on Newton's laws of motion to explain planetary movements. While Newton's formula closely aligned with astronomical observations, there was always a slight discrepancy between theory and reality. This minor annoyance was often brushed aside, with many attributing it to imperfect telescopes or calculation errors. Instead of addressing the issue, they found numerous ways to sidestep it. It was not until over 2 centuries later that Einstein emerged, highlighting that Newtonian physics, while producing somewhat workable numbers, was not merely in need of a quick bug fixing. No, the theory was fundamentally flawed and misrepresented the universe's true nature. It is kind of wild. Like, that wasn't, in the grand scheme of things, that long ago. And it's like, that physics was shaken to its core. It's kind of nuts that was less than 100 years ago. Feuerbach's folly mirrors this anecdotal interlude. While he perceived the emblem of Castle Bugen as an almost impeccable match, a discerning eye would beg to differ. Kaspar's preserved sketch, though bearing some undeniable resemblances, was anything but perfect. In fact, I was easily able to find banners that arguably fit Kaspar's lines even better. Take the House of Wittelsbach, for example. Symbols such as chevrons, lions, swords, and crowns are no rarities in royal iconography. They are ubiquitous and certainly not the exclusive domain of Baden. It appears Feuerbach, perhaps subconsciously, yearned for the drawing to corroborate his pre-existing beliefs, leading him to generously overlook any discordant evidence. Yes, indeed he did. Alternatively, one might entertain the idea that Kaspar deliberately looked up the banner of a random castle associated with Baden, then concocted a tale of nocturnal revelation to mislead Feuerbach on purpose. Yes, totally. He looked it up. There's a whole giant room of books called a library. We know this. He just looked it up, or he was told about it. By someone else who was in on the con, probably the person who dropped him off in the town or whatever. As for the horse drawing, again, close enough hit bias. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm being so dumb. This is the... You know how earlier in today's episode I was like, yeah, I started recording this yesterday. I started recording this now 2 days ago. Obviously, the horse in the basement, he would never have had access to that basement.
Oh.
So how did it get there? Sorry, I was like, well, yeah, someone could have carved it in their basement, but how would they have got in there? Everyone's probably screaming that at the screen or in their headphones while they're listening to this. But I'm sorry, it takes me 3 days. It's a very long episode. While I do understand the fun in drawing such connections, we must not fall victim to those oversensitive pattern-finding machines put between our ears by 7 million years of humanoid evolution. Kaspar never mentioned the drawing of a horse. He spoke of a toy horse made from wood, which is clearly not the same thing. So here's the boring yet likely true explanation. The horse could indeed have been drawn by the hand of an orphan, but not by Kaspar Hauser. I've hidden the decisive clue in a sideline remark roughly 20 pages ago, so some of you might have already figured it out, except small brain Simon. As mentioned before, Castle Bugen's main edifice served as an orphanage from 1820 to 1980. For a span exceeding 1.5 centuries, the vicinity had been abuzz with the energy and curiosity of several thousand children. Now, what are the chances of them not exploring the nearby ruins of a vacant side building? It's 0. Like, the odds of them exploring a vacant building is 0. There were there was like an old gym at my school. There was like, there were lots of like empty places at my school. Like, where just, I don't know, like they were used in the past. There was this entire gym building, which was never used. And it was kind of like derelict, but it had all this gym equipment in there. And like, we didn't break into it, but you could just like open a window and climb in or whatever. And we'd just spend our lunch breaks like pushing out. We'd have the giant things that you drop onto. I don't know what they're called, like gym bags or whatever, where you like crash mats. And we'd pile up all these crash mats in the gym, and there was a big balcony, and we'd jump off the balcony onto the crash mats. And so there's 0 chance. Kids are going to explore abandoned all the time. They would sneak into every hidden chamber they could find and vandalize the walls with the most cliche motive a child could draw, which would either be a horse or a massive penis. To curb this mischief, the orphanage authorities eventually sealed off the room using mortar, setting the stage for a televised revelation that was entirely meaningless. I cannot prove any of this, yet according to Occam's razor, my story is to be preferred over the one presented by Kaspar Hauser fans. Yes, I'm with you, Dennis. He's a con man. It's a con. Or maybe the TV production company put the horse there to fix their otherwise lame-ass documentary. I tried to get a hold of those behind the project, but nobody replied to my attempted bribery. I suppose there would be an NDA anyway. Yeah, but NDAs expire. They don't go on forever. Wasn't the TV show really old? Yeah, before we turn our backs on Bugen for good, we must delve into one more intricate layer of mystery, the tale of S. Harnes Sprantio. To jog your memory, in the year 1816, against the tumultuous backdrop of post-war Europe, a message, enigmatic and forlorn, encased within a bottle. Oh, right, yes. I remember this from 2 days ago. Had been discovered near the French village of Chems. The note, written in archaic Latin, was a desperate cry for help, and its author, a dethroned ruler of sorts, begged the finder to rescue him from his dungeon near Laufenberg by the Rhine. For years, this cryptic letter gathered dust in the silent chambers of the French archives until historian Jean Missler, who I've quoted several times before, stumbled upon it during his research efforts. Intrigued, he could not dismiss the potential links to the Hauser myth, and understandably so. First of all, the town of Laufenberg is indeed quite close to Castle Bugen, barely a 20-minute drive along the flows of the Rhine. Second, a floating object tossed into the river's currents near Bugen could quite possibly end up near Chems, granted it somehow avoided narrow curves and other obstructions along its lengthy journey. The most important part, however, becomes apparent when looking at the name and squeezing your eyes a little. Upon rearranging the letters and then translating the German result back to English, S. Harnes Sprantio can be turned into his son Kaspar. Hauser enthusiasts went ape after learning this, yet it must be noted that Jean Missler himself had remained rather skeptical of his own discovery, as virtually every name will spell some sort of secret message if you try hard enough. Ooh, I wonder what my name could be turned into. I must have looked that up when I was a kid, but I have no memory of what it could be. You could, for example, turn oh yes, we're doing it! Could turn Simon Whistler into Hitler is me now. Yes, me, reincarnated Hitler. Yes! Does this reveal any hidden truth? Well, I certainly do not hope so. The anagram doesn't even fully work, as I had to smuggle an additional E into it, just like his son Kaspar requires the S. So this is just bull. You can't just put an E in there. Which is likely not a part of the name, but short for signed. Adding to the ambiguity, we must wonder why Kaspar would scramble up his name to begin with, and why he would introduce himself as his son. Had he been referencing the late Archduke, Karl Friedrich of Baden? Seems reasonable at first glance, but make no mistake, the Archduke would not have been the prince's father, but his grandfather. Then again, consider all those spooky little coincidences. The message fits the timeline perfectly, the specified location is uncannily appropriate, and there is explicit mention of a royal conspiracy that could hardly align any closer with Feuerbach's subsequent theories, which he formed by means entirely unrelated to this piece of potential evidence. By the way, Kaspar in this anagram begins with a C rather than a K, but worry not. Though the letter K exists in the Latin language, words must not begin with it, thus replacing it with a C is not really suspicious. It is simply the correct Latin transcription of the name, but it doesn't matter, because it's nonsense. So, is Harnes Sprantio the same person as Kaspar Hauser? Well, if you ask me for my personal opinion, I would say, well, possibly in theory, yet rather improbable. I'd say exceedingly improbable. Funnily enough, the message in question fits with the entirely unrelated myth of Bathram Bruneau equally well, arguably even better. You know what, I may even retell his story in the future for a little crossover episode, so you could be like, hey, that's the thing from the other video. Audiences love this stuff, they sure do, Dennis, and it's also great for my viewer retention, because that means, like, someone will be listening to this episode and then they'll be like, ooh, cue that one up afterwards, yes please. So let's do that, Dennis, okay? In any case, assuming it's, like, an interesting story, which I assume it is, otherwise you wouldn't have pitched it. In any case, while acknowledging a slight chance of being wrong, it seems prudent to remain skeptical. Considering the factual evidence, as is, we can safely assume that the prefect of Chems had been right to dismiss the message in 1816. More likely than not, it was but a joke. Furthermore, it is reasonably certain that Kaspar Hauser had never been at Castle Bugen, and if he was indeed abducted and brought to some other location, of which there are several more candidates, it was clearly not in the manner he had repeatedly described. Sure, one might argue that his memories had been clouded by decades of trauma, fostering slightly dramatized yet essentially truthful recollections of his time in captivity. Maybe he had been allowed outside occasionally and then somehow suppressed those rare glimmers of light. We may even explain his Cress-induced visions of a palace this way. One small issue, though while traumatic experiences may alter or erase recollections of human brains, they certainly cannot change the contents of a letter. It was not only Kaspar who had spoken of ceaseless darkness and solitude, but also the written lines addressed to Knight Commander von Wessenegg. There is simply no conceivable argument to explain away or sneakily reconcile this glaring contradiction. When Kaspar had appeared at Nuremberg's Unschlitt marketplace, he did so bearing the most damning evidence, discrediting his very own claims. The Hauser always wins, until he does not. When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains must be the truth. Given we have refuted virtually everything, albeit with a slim degree of remaining uncertainty, it appears as though only one notion truly survived the last 3 hours of scrutiny. What if everything had been but a convoluted hoax, a gargantuan magic trick performed by a con man? Yes! Yes, Dennis! Though I've never fully spelled out this theory, I did allude to it on several occasions throughout the story, but now that we've completed our collection of facts and clues, we can weave them into a narrative of fraud and trickery from start to finish, and then see how well it adds up. So, let me paint you a picture. Imagine a young man navigating through the dusky streets of post-Napoleonic Bavaria. His threadbare attire, reminiscent of better days, rustled against the crisp, biting air of an unforgiving winter. The land, scarred and weary, struggled to yield enough for its children. The year 1815 had been befallen by many crises. The massive eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia, releasing enormous amounts of volcanic ash into the atmosphere and thus shielding crops from sunlight. That was only one of them. Bread had turned into a luxury for those of lower standing. People quenched the persistent gnawing hunger with turnips and whatever else they could forage. Ugh, like, turnips are fine, but it's like, that's all we're eating? Just turnips, huh? What's for dinner? Turnips! What's the difference between a turnip and a parsnip? I quite like parsnips. I remember turnips being a little less nice. The young man, too, bore the symptoms of lean times, cheeks slightly hollowed, but eyes still burning with an untamable fire of life and ambition. He ambled past the withered fields, monuments to the harvests that had failed them. Yet amidst the despair, the grandeur of the nobility remained unshaken. Castles and estates stood proud and tall, their opulent spires piercing the grey skies, casting long shadows over the cottages that housed the common folk. A stark tableau of inequality, painted in the harsh strokes of war's aftermath. I just want to say, that's a beautifully written paragraph, Dennis. Jesus Christ. That's very nice. Very impressed. I feel like I'm reading a very good book with that. One day, as the young man made his way to the market with meagre coins clinking in his pocket, a procession of the royal class with their plump horses and gleaming carriages passed him by. The air grew thick with the fragrance of their lavish feasts and sumptuous wines, a cruel reminder of his own Spartan existence. The stark divide stirred a bitterness within him. To imagine the lofty halls of aristocratic homes harbouring banquet after banquet, whilst his own table bore mere crumbs. It was an injustice that sowed seeds of resentment nurtured by every gust the Duke's gilded carriages threw in his face. Yeah, it doesn't sound like a good idea. They're just like, everyone's starving and they're just rolling through the town having a feast. Is that feast happening in their carriage? What's going on? But like, dude, people gonna chop your head off, my dude. As the last echoes of the procession had faded, a daring thought began to form in the young man's mind. He paused, mid-step, the weight of the world momentarily lifted by an audacious idea. What if he could bridge the gap? Not through labour or marriage, but by fraud. The thought was surely mad. A flight of fancy birthed from the cruel juxtaposition of his reality and theirs. But as the wind whistled past him, it seemed to whisper words of encouragement. Noble ancestry was, after all, a tale told, a lineage recorded, and records, as we knew, could be forgotten, miscounted, or even fabricated. A few well-placed stories, perhaps a forged document or two. He had heard of charlatans who had done far more with far less. The more he pondered upon it, the clearer his path became. During the forthcoming weeks, the young man embarked on a journey of research, and before long, he stumbled upon a certain myth regarding the Grand Duchy of Baden, a supposed coup d'etat with a rightful ruler replaced 16 years ago. The accusation was unproven, outlandish, and quite likely bogus, but it was just what he needed. From that day on, the upcoming conman immersed himself in this conspiracy. He became one with it. As the winter snow had melted and the spring began to blossom, his carefully crafted narrative was complete. He would not make any claims directly, though. Instead, he would carefully insinuate, leaving crumbs for others to piece together. Yes, like any good con. Among those subtle hints were 2 letters which he had artificially aged by fraying the edges and staining the parchment with tea. Both of them turned out to be masterpieces of deception, although he could not get the ink right. With both of his props and a brand new identity prepared, Kaspar Hauser headed to the town of Nuremberg, a place where no one would recognize his face. The rest of his scheme? Pretty simple in theory. He chose some lively street at random, took position, and played the part of a bewildered soul who had just emerged from the shadows of an underground confinement. In no time, the Nuremberg townsfolk swarmed around his unfamiliar appearance. Nonetheless, Kaspar's plan did not unfold as smoothly as it envisioned. His tale, though compelling, was laden with inconsistencies. The city's constabulary grew suspicious of the letters immediately. Instead of being treated with the sympathy or hailed as nobility, Kaspar found himself thrown into the notorious Lugensland prison tower. However, all was not lost. Kaspar's story had caught the ear of Mayor Binder, an individual of thoughts as sharp as fluffy pancakes. He posed no challenge at all. Kaspar was indeed quite smart, thus he pretended to be stupid. Akin to a lion sneaking up on his prey, he feigned his own mental underdevelopment, only to grow at the fastest pace possible without raising eyebrows. Although it took a couple of months, he could not only trick Binder, but play him like a fiddle. Kaspar dropped hints, spun more tales, and acted with such finesse that it was impossible for the gullible mayor to remain skeptical. Amazing. He's such a good con man. He's very smart. Daumer, his subsequent caretaker, was just as easily fooled. As a scholar with a penchant for both esoteric stories and younger company, he could hardly imagine a living student more welcome. He happily housed the foundling of Nuremberg in his lavish abode, bestowing upon him all the comforts a young man of his alleged stature could desire. Yet for all the kindness presented to him, Kaspar found this life a bit boring and overall not quite as satisfying in the long run. Oh, chill, Kaspar. You've done very well for yourself. Just enjoy what you have. Just enjoy it, Kaspar. You've come so far. He yearned for more, not just the benefits of an upper-class home and free meals, but the opulence and luxury that belonged to the true elite. Desperation and ambition intertwined, leading him to a risky move. He faked an assassination attempt on his life, hoping the officials would move him to a safer alternative in consequence. A castle, perhaps, a royal palace, guarded by soldiers at all times. Unfortunately, fate, it seemed, was not without a sense of irony. Instead of fulfilling his fantasies of power and wealth, Kaspar found himself under the stern guardianship of Bieberbach, a man known for his strict, often cruel ways and somewhat ascetic living conditions. His leap of faith had backfired dramatically. I feel like this is those people who appeal a conviction and then they get more time. It's like, Kaspar, you made an error. Things were so good, Kaspar. But Hauser, always the strategist, quickly conjured another trick from his sleeve. After a particularly harrowing encounter with Bieberbach, he staged an accident. The noise of the rifle echoed throughout the house, and Kaspar was found injured, though not critically. It was the dramatic spectacle he needed. The news spread like wildfire, and Kaspar's safety was once again the talk of the town. This time, the gamble would pay off greatly. Enter the Tuch family, renowned not only for their immense riches, but also their firm standing within political and social echelons. It was a dream come true, with all his desires met and surpassed. Still, in our eternal quest for more, the insatiable drive of human nature often sees us sail too close to the sun, melting our own wings in the process. Kaspar was no exception to this curse. When the chance of even further improvement arose in the form of Stanhope's promises, he could not resist grasping at the mirage. Alas, it was the Bieberbach debacle all over again. Stanhope proved more perceptive than Kaspar had anticipated, leaving him stranded in less than fortunate conditions a second time. Meyer thought very little of Kaspar's supposed royal roots, nay, of his person in general, and thus treated him in a degrading, perhaps humiliating way. Kaspar even had to work for his expenses, which he deemed unworthy of a prince, albeit a fictional one. Chill, Kaspar. Again, it's just too much, Kaspar. Just, you don't push. To rectify this steep downfall, he resorted to methods he had successfully employed before. Kaspar forged a confession letter signed by a made-up person with not-so-subtle roots in Baden. Given that Feuerbach had passed in the meantime, he could not hide any nuanced clues between the lines this time, as nobody was around to follow up on them. Instead, he was forced to spell out the connection to Baden. With this tampered evidence by his side, he made his way to a secluded corner of Ansbach's palace garden, mentally preparing for the step that would follow. Drawing in a shuddering breath, he clutched the knife tightly in his hand. The blade's cold edge promised both pain and release. At that moment, as time seemed to stretch to infinity before him, the ghost of all his past choices came rushing back, the birth of his audacious idea, the allure of extravagant life, the many deceptions, and the price of ambition. Mustering all the strength he could, Kaspar thrust the knife into his abdomen, wincing as the pain lanced through his body. But it wasn't the sharp, brief sting he had anticipated. The overwhelming sensation was a wave of panic, cascading through his mind. His vision blurred, his ears rang, and for a moment, the world seemed to darken. Realizing he had gone deeper than intended, feeling the warmth of his own blood seeping through his clothes, Kaspar knew he had gravely miscalculated. He'd stabbed himself in the back by stabbing himself in the front. There was no waiting for somebody to stumble upon him. He wouldn't survive that long. Drawing upon the last remnants of his strength, Kaspar began to stagger and hobble. Every step sent a jolt of agony coursing through him, yet he was driven by a desperate will to survive. Dude, this is a really terrible idea. Stabbing yourself in the abdomen? Like, all the way through? You're in the past, dude. You're gonna die.
Yeah, logic, bitch!
But first, the knife. Evidence of his crooked act had to be discarded. Before long, he chanced upon the garden's deep well. With a strained effort, he threw the blade into its depths, ensuring its secrets were forever entombed in its watery abyss. In agonizing torment, he then made his way to Mara's home. The narrow alleys echoed his ragged breathing and faltering footsteps. Every shadow seemed to close in on him, as if the Grim Reaper was reaching for his soul. But Kaspar managed to evade the grasp. The towering structure of his teacher's abode appeared as a beacon in his haze-filled vision. Drawing upon every ounce of willpower left, he fell against the door, knocking weakly, praying that Mara would be there. And he was. We are already aware of the subsequent events. However, when viewed through this particular narrative lens, they appear even more tragic. Instead of seeking immediate medical care and allowing Mare to summon assistance, Kaspar gave precedence to his deceitful schemes, a decision that exacted the gravest toll. Hauser will be able to tell you exactly what I look like and where I am from, the letter said. To save the Hauser the trouble, I will tell you myself where I am from. I come from the Bavarian border near a river. I will tell you my name, M.L.O. But contrary to these assertions, Hauser never explicitly revealed any further details about his alleged assassin's identity. Well, at least not intentionally. You see, the note bore a peculiar spelling error. In German, the phrase "from where" is represented by the single word "wo." However, in the cryptic confession letter, it was written as "wo-her," 2 words, a unique and rather unusual mistake. Yet according to both Daumer and Meyer, it was one made quite frequently by Kaspar Hauser. Oh, dude, you're so busted.
You got me.
We decoded your so hard. The wonders of stained underwear. Interesting name for a chapter here. Everyone convinced that Kaspar Hauser was a fraud? Excellent. Now let me pull that rug out from under your feet. Oh, Dennis, no, I was convinced many hours ago, like 2 hours ago. And
oh no.
Though we scrutinise nearly every piece of evidence imaginable, there is still one item that might contain answers of much-needed clarity. I've got no elegant way of saying this, let me put it in all its disgusting glory. We are investigating the stains in Kaspar Hauser's underpants. And I really hope this episode is not sponsored by Sheath. Yes. Upon Kaspar Hauser's death, presumably by his own doing, the Ansbach authorities swiftly recognized the historical significance. His clothing from that fateful day was quickly taken, examined briefly, and then showcased in the town's museum. It's a poignant irony that even in death, Kaspar Hauser served as a questionable object of display, or at least his garments did. Fast forward to 1996, nearly 2 centuries later, and technological advancements presented a unique opportunity, the extraction of brownish residues from inside the underwear. And just to be clear, I'm talking about the bloodstain. Okay. I thought maybe he himself after he stabbed himself, he's in so much pain that he voids his bowels or something. Or, after he dies. Doesn't that happen?
When people die, they void their bowels. Ah! Oh my God! What a jackass!
In any case, they snipped a small fabric piece and dispatched it to the Institute of Forensic Medicine in Munich and the Forensic Science Service Laboratory in Birmingham for DNA analysis, comparing the genome to a living descendant of Stephanie Bonaparte, the alleged biological mother of Kaspar Hauser. Both results were inconclusive, although they had been widely misreported as likely confirmative. Still, neither Munich nor Birmingham ruled out close biological relationship between Baden's lineage and the orphan of Nuremberg. The idea of direct ancestry remained very consistent with their findings. Yes, but not conclusive at all. In 2002, further tests were conducted on hair samples from Hauser's hat. Once again, the outcomes were neither confirmed nor refuted any potential kinship, that is, not conclusively. Although there was significant overlap in the mitochondrial DNA, far more than could be attributed to pure luck, they also found some discrepancies, vastly beyond what you would expect from two directly related individuals. In theory, you could explain these differences with spontaneous mutations and declare it a match. Though the forensic laboratory maintained scientific caution, there had been a televised press conference, and they came like super close to confirming it. Quoting, "At this point, it would be very irresponsible to say no," the spokesman said, while staring and nodding in a weirdly intense way, as if to add, "if you know what I mean." A few pages ago, I wrote, "When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains must be the truth." It's one of my favorite quotes, loosely taken from the Sherlock Holmes short story, The Sign of Four. Why do I like it so much? Well, because it's true. But what if multiple things are not impossible at the same time? Are they somehow both true? According to both quantum physics and Conan Doyle, yes.
Was is good?
Was Kaspar Hauser a con artist who accidentally ended his own life? I laid out this narrative in excruciating detail, and there was nothing impossible about it. But at the same time, some of you may disagree, and you would be right to do so. Kaspar Hauser, the Lost Prince of Baden? Improbable. But is it impossible, my dearest Watson? Now want to hear something super frustrating? No?
You're a coward.
Well, I'm going to tell you anyway. You see, even if we were to believe that Kaspar Hauser had been a charlatan, the question of his true identity would still remain intriguing. Believe it or not, for a brief period of time, there existed a widely accepted consensus about that. Kaspar's origin, his authentic origin, had always been suspected to be southern Bavaria. This was mainly attributed to the fact that Hauser had been vaccinated against smallpox, a practice that was mandatory only there and in Denmark. Gunther Hess, a medical expert with a passion for history, pursued this lead. He meticulously combed through vaccination records from 1810 to 1820, cross-referencing them with other historical documents. His mission was to trace every Bavarian boy named either Kaspar or Hauser. Amid this intensive research, a particular entry caught his attention: Kaspar Hechenberger. Intriguingly, the name vanished from the records at around the same time Kaspar Hauser appeared in Nuremberg. Every clue and piece of evidence seemed to fit seamlessly, offering a tantalizing solution that appeared almost undeniable. Alas, this theory was later debunked. A subsequent investigation by the German Spiegel magazine discovered Hechenberger's actual resting place in a Tyrol village. Contrary to previous belief, Kaspar Hechenberger had lived quite the normal life, yet somehow managed to leave no archival traces behind. With this revelation, Kaspar Hauser's identity was left unsolved once more, and it remains unsolved to this day. Cryptic illusions. Number 1. The island of Schutt. Alright, here's a quirky tidbit for your next trivia night. Schutt translates from German to something like dump or fill, so Schutt is basically called Trash Pile Island. Back in the 14th century, folks in Nuremberg were digging massive tunnels under the town. And what do you do with all that leftover sandstone? Well, you dump it in the river. Obviously. Before they knew it, voila, they had their very own island. The digging did not stop there. More tunnels in the 15th and 16th centuries meant more sandstone, and yes, they dumped that in the river too, resulting in the Upper Trash Pile Island, or Upper Schutt if you want to be fancy. And now the million-dollar question. Why the extensive underground real estate? Was it for a secret society? A hideout for medieval superheroes? No. The OG purpose was to store 26 million litres of beer. Awesome. Classic Bavaria. Number 2. The Toy Horse of Castle Pilsach. To clarify, this script contains roughly 30,000 words. Good lord, we just read half a book, guys. Thanks for being here. If you're here at the end, well done. It's almost like an audiobook, but very weird because I keep interjecting. Translating to an episode duration of about 3 hours and 30 minutes. Dude, that's going to be pretty bang on, I reckon.
Wrong answer, forehead.
Had I included every relevant theory and piece of evidence, we could have easily stretched it beyond 6 or 7 times that duration. No way. Dennis, you should write the book on this. You should expand this. Numerous intriguing perspectives and historical sources were deliberately excluded for the sake of, brevity. However, the allure of Castle Pilsac could not be ignored, so I decided to sneak it in at the last minute. As mentioned before, Bügen was not the sole proposed location for Kaspar Hauser's suspected dungeon. In fact, there were at least 8 contenders, with Castle Pilsac being one of them. In 1919, the castle had been acquired by German writer Clara Hoffner, better known by her pseudonym Clara Hoffer. During 1924 renovations, a room on the mezzanine floor came to light, which Hoffer believed was a concealed dungeon. She announced her find in a newspaper, suggesting that Kaspar Hauser might have spent his early years there. She also authored a book on the subject, though it is not highly regarded by historians, as it would seem. Researcher and Hauser expert Fritz Klee later inspected the dungeon and found no historical evidence linking it to the orphan of Nuremberg. Case closed? Well, wait a second. Ownership of Castle Pilsac shifted soon after. The current owners, who prefer to remain anonymous, revamped the place in 1982, and lo and behold, amidst the rubble of an ancient staircase they tore down, in a twist worthy of a B-movie, there it was. A white, wooden toy horse. They had dendrochronological analysis conducted on it, and wouldn't you know it, the wood dated to around 1820. A perfect match. While this is an intriguing anecdote, it's worth noting that the details of the analysis have not been independently verified. The current owners have chosen to keep the horse as a private artifact and allegedly refused any independent tests to be conducted on it. Yeah, until I see that horse going off to a lab to be properly tested by an independent party, I just don't believe it. Needless to say, we should therefore take these claims with a grain of salt, or perhaps just throw in the entire salt shaker. Either way, Castle Pilsac sure knows how to keep the legends galloping. And after some 3.5 hours, we did it. We did it. We're finished.
I'm done! Do you hear me?
Thank you so much for being here. If you like this show and long episodes like this, why not leave me a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts? If you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Go and give my voice a rest.